Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It's not Monday, but it is recruiting hour time. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher of Irish Breakdown. That guy, if you may have forgot who that is, that's Ryan Roberts, our director of recruiting. Somebody decided to take last week off and go on vacation. So he is back. The good news is, the bad news is we didn't get him for a week, right? And we had a lot of people asking about you, Ryan. A lot of people miss you. When's Ryan coming back? As you see in the chat, when's Ryan coming back? So he is back. So we missed you for a week. But the good news is he's back refreshed and ready to rock and roll. And what better way to welcome Ryan back than with some quarterback talk? I think he knew Dante was going to commit and was like, I'm out of here for that. Get that. I'm out. So Notre Dame quarterback recruiting, obviously, Ryan, has been a big topic of conversation for quite some time. And obviously, it centered around one quarterback for most of that time. That was Dante Moore. We have a very long intel piece on what happened there, why Dante ended up not being at Notre Dame, and just the whole backstory behind that. And so now it's time to move on. We're going to move on here. I'm excited that we're not going to have to answer any more Dante Moore questions. And it's time to talk about what Notre Dame is going to do, because to kick things off, Ryan, we need to address this. There's no question Notre Dame needs a quarterback in the 2023 recruiting class. It doesn't have to be Dante, obviously, but they can't not get a quarterback in this class, in my opinion.
Well, I think it was on the mailbag this week, Brian, that I wrote. In the last 20 cycles, that's only happened one time where Notre Dame hasn't had a quarterback recruit. I believe that was 2009, if I remember that correctly. And it's even happened where they got two quarterbacks in a cycle a couple of times, right? So historically, you want a quarterback in a class. It's a low number position, but you want to take that one quarterback that kind of continues that cycle. So I agree with you. I don't think that it's advantageous to skip on a quarterback. I think that Notre Dame is already, it was preemptive to a degree, right? Like they knew for a little bit that things were trending away with Dante. And, you know, again, if you want the whole backstory, please go join the irishbreakdown.com, the message board. You can kind of see the full details in there. But they've been aligning their next man up type of philosophy, right? Like what the board's going to look like, that we're going to talk about a little bit today. But I mean, to your point, one time in 20 years tells me that usually you want a quarterback in the class. And I don't think that changes in 2023 at all.
When you talk about, Ryan, sort of the board and how this isn't like they weren't completely caught off guard on this. Notre Dame made the decision. We don't need to spend a lot of time about it because like people's opinions are varied on this. And I think both sides have valid arguments. I was in the put all your chips in the Dante Moore basket. Part of the reason for that was it was twofold. Number one is I always felt Dante would make a summer decision. Sure. He ended up making a summer. Well, I thought spring or summer, and he ended up making a early summer decision as opposed to late spring. And so you thought he would make a decision sooner, which gave you a lot of time to then jump on to the next guy. The second part about it is this is such a deep quarterback class that you knew there's going to be guys on the board that you can turn to. Either A, as guys you can flip from somewhere else, or B, there's just going to be some really talented, uncommitted players on the board. And that's kind of true. There's some really good uncommitted players. And a lot of the Notre Dame board is guys that are committed to other schools that they are going to try to convince to get on campus and convince that they should be a part of what Notre Dame is doing. So I think the other thing too, is when you just look practically speaking, you look at the current Notre Dame roster, right? You have Drew Pine, Tyler Buckner, then Steve Angeli. Right. If all three of those can commit to staying the next 3 years until CJ Carr shows up, then sure, you could maybe get away with not bringing in a quarterback in this class. There's two problems with that. Number one is I don't like that because I want to bring in a talented quarterback every year, right? I mean, just bring in a talented kid every year. Number two, you can't guarantee me that Drew Pine is going to be on the roster beyond this season, much less next season. And here's why I say that. There is no intel that I've had that has told me anything about Drew Pine transferring. So just everybody this is not me saying something that I know to be true, but I can't say that I know it. That's not it at all. This is me just looking at the college football landscape. And that is that if Tyler Buckner beats out Drew Pine this year, Drew Pine, because of the COVID year, is still going to have 3 more seasons of eligibility remaining, which means he has two choices. One, he could stay at Notre Dame and hope that after Tyler Buckner finishes his career in 4 years, that Drew Pine can then come back for a 6th year and start for 1. which is possible, assuming he
Sure.
is able to beat out whoever else Notre Dame gets, right? Which that would make a lot of sense to me if Drew Pine loves football, like we know he loves football. I also know Drew Pine loves Notre Dame, but if Tyler Buchner, a younger player, beats him out, there's not a path for him getting on the board,
Sure.
in the starting lineup. So then Tyler looks at it and says, but what we have said is we know that Tyler Buchner also incredibly values the Notre Dame degree. Well, here's the reality. He's going to have a Notre Dame degree most likely by the end of this school year. So then you're in a situation where he's probably, he's going to have a chance after this season to transfer somewhere, have 3 years of eligibility to remaining because of the COVID year, which is just nuts to explain all that stuff, and get a chance to start somewhere. So he can get the best of both worlds. He can be a starting quarterback for multiple seasons, and he can have a Notre Dame degree, which leads me to believe, my opinion only, that there's a good chance that Tyler Buchner won't be around, or excuse me, Drew Pine won't be around after. There's a chance that he won't be around after the season, which means you have to prepare for that. So on top of, I already won a fourth quarterback, and then and then it just continues year after year, get a quarterback. On top of that desire, there's also the fact that you have to prepare yourself for the fact that Drew Pine may leave after this season. So those two things combined, Ryan, I just don't think you can be in a situation where you can anticipate things just working out perfectly at the position. And that's why you have to, on top of the fact this is just too good of a year at quarterback not to get one, in my opinion.
Yeah. I don't disagree at all with that sense. I mean, it's the most important position in sports. So you want to continue to replenish that spot on the roster, right? And I mean, even the other side of it, Brian, is like, we both think that Tyler Buchner is going to be a dude. Like, I know we both do, but there's also that chance of like, maybe he doesn't develop properly.
Or
Maybe
gets
he gets
hurt,
injured.
right.
Exactly. So even that, you're putting all your chips in the Tyler Buchner basket, especially after next season, in case to the kind of the picture you're painting here is, what if Drew Pine is out and then you're down to two scholarship quarterbacks, one quarterback though that's had playing time, and then you have Steve Angeli who's the backup, but then after that, who do we have? Ron Powless? Like, we have a guy that's a walk-on option for Notre Dame. So continuing to replenish that pipeline, I think, is huge, and it's one of those things where I talked about this in the mailbag. It's like Tyler Buchner and CJ Carr, perfect world. These guys kind of bridge to one another, and then you have great quarterback play for X amount of years. But you are putting yourself in the position, if you don't get a good quarterback in 2023, that you're going to have to depend on that. And if it doesn't work out on either side, then you're in a little bit of a struggle there. And then you need to figure out, hey, now 2025 gets even more important. 2026 gets even more important. You're putting yourself into a lower margin of error if you don't hit on a 2023 quarterback that's at least a player that can play if need be.
And none of this has anything to do with a low thought of Steve Angeli. If Steve Angeli is exactly what his supporters think that he is, and I hope that turns out to be true, great kid. We just have our opinion of him as a player. But if we are wrong and he's as good as some people think he's going to be, that doesn't change what we're saying at all. And that's the reality of it. So I just think a quarterback is needed in this class. And so what are the options? Option one is the one that a lot of people have talked about, and that is the potential for CJ Carr to reclassify to the 2023 class. That is still an option on the table, but there's a reason Notre Dame is reaching out to other quarterbacks, because I've said this all along, despite all the other talk that's out there, I've never felt that CJ wanted to reclassify. And I don't want CJ to reclassify. So, I mean, it's kind of a double that. I understand why Notre Dame brought the subject up, but they never pushed it on him in the way that some people took a comment that we made on the site. They never pushed it on him. They brought it up and they said, we're going to give you the option of this. So as they kind of played the thing out with Dante Moore to see, can we close this one out, work through some of the issues that are going on, then CJ had the option of reclassifying if he wanted it. That's kind of what it was. And CJ, I don't think, wanted to reclassify. And I'm glad. I don't want him to reclassify. I want him to play his next 2 years of high school. He could still change his mind, but that's not going to change Notre Dame looking for and pursuing another quarterback. So if CJ Carr picked up the phone tomorrow and said, hey, want to reclassify, let's do this, then you'd probably see Notre Dame just focus on him. And okay, that's fine. And then turn to 2024 recruiting. In my opinion, Ryan, my ideal scenario is that he stays where he is, continues developing, maturing his body, maturing his game, go through high school, lead your team to a championship, maybe a couple, and then recruit a 2023 quarterback. That would be the ideal scenario for me. You and I have not necessarily talked about this live, so I want to give you a chance to kind of speak to what you think about reclassification in this instance and kind of what your desire is in this situation.
I'm in the same boat. I would rather him stick to 2024. I don't think rushing things all the time works out, right? Like I think of some of the reclassifications, some of the reclassifications that have happened recently. I can't think of a ton that it's really worked out a ton. I mean, like the immediate names, obviously think of Quinn Ewers. He hasn't played football yet. Obviously, he reclassified for a reason that we've talked about before. Tony Grimes is another kid from North Carolina. I remember that reclassified and he ended up starting, but I don't think he's been developed properly as good as he can be for North Carolina.
And I'll say this, it's not going to turn out well for North Carolina because I think that Tony Grimes is going to really break out now this year, which means they're going to get one of his prime years instead of two. Had he not reclassified, last year would have been his freshman year. This breakout year would be his sophomore year, and they'd still get him for another year. And the biggest one of all, JT Daniels.
Yes.
I think that really hurt JT Daniels' development as a player, is not having that final year, kind of letting his body mature. Because what's been the issue? He hasn't been able to stay healthy, right? And I feel like you need that development. So I think that is a big reason why I'm against reclassification if it's my choice. I'm also someone who believes that people should have the freedom to make decisions that they want to do, as long as it's not against the rules, and reclassification is not against the rules, nor should it be, because if you think you're ready and you've done the work academically, go for it. Just know that there's risk, like anything in the world. There's risk involved. For sure. So I personally would not advise to do it, but I also think people should have the freedom to do it. It's not one of those things that, like the one-time transfer rule, that's a rule I think is stupid, it should be changed. No, I don't believe that. So I'm just not a big fan of it. I'm glad. I know you weren't, but I wanted to give you a chance to speak on it as well, Ryan. And we haven't seen a lot work out often. I
can't think of one time. I mean,
I think Tony Grimes is the closest.
Sure, but but to your point, also, is it worked out for either side yet? I mean, because Tony is a pretty good player for North Carolina, but he's not the player that people thought he was going to be yet. I agree. I think a breakout might be coming, but it hasn't worked out for him technically. And to your point, it might not work out for the program when you look at the full scope of things. So it may have helped out in the near future for the program, getting a player of his caliber to come in a year earlier. But I would just argue that I don't know if that necessarily worked out if you really dissect it further.
And I'll say this, JT Daniels was the most advanced high school quarterback I've seen since Jimmy Clausen. I mean, you go back and watch his junior year. It's one of the best high school seasons of football. I mean, the only two seasons I've ever seen that were better, Ronald Curry as a junior and a senior was phenomenal. Jimmy Clausen as a senior, and JT Daniels' junior season was special.
He threw 70-something touchdowns.
It was insane.
It
was insane. Nuts. I mean, and just his feel for the game and all those different things. And yet, even for him, he just wasn't ready. And he did some nice things. He just wasn't ready maturity-wise. His body wasn't ready yet. He needed that other year to get ready. So I'm just not a big fan of it. And I'm glad that Notre Dame is not pushing it on to CJ. They've just say, look, you have this option if you want it. And it's with the understanding of that he would then sit an extra year of development behind Tyler Buchner. Just so we're clear, I've done a lot of digging on this. The potential of him reclassifying never had anything to do with Tyler Buchner. The only thing that I ever heard about Tyler Buchner's name was if if Tyler's way better than we think he's going to be, and he leaves after his junior year to go pro, something like that, which we don't anticipate, at least as of right now. And so somebody's asking if Tony Grimes is a corner. He is a corner. We're just talking about early enrollees or reclassifications in general. Most of them have been quarterbacks. That's why there's a lot of quarterbacks in the conversation.
Brian, can I throw out a quick trivia question for you? I love this. Since we're talking about gaudy high school numbers a little bit with JT, do you know who? I think he still holds the national record for most touchdown passes in a single season in high school, 91 touchdowns. Do you know this?
Wasn't it J.R. House?
Nope.
It wasn't him? Who was it?
It was I just lost his name. Jake. No, I know it. I'm coming back. Hey, I'm trying to get back in the group, man. It's the first
ask a question.
Week,
you kind of have the answer.
Jake Browning, Folsom High School.
Jake Browning, interesting. I did not know he threw 91 touchdowns in a.
He threw 91 to 7 interceptions. It was insane.
That's a little nuts. I mean, were they just throwing it at the 1 yard line? Is that pretty much what they were doing? I thought J.R. Howe. Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. He had 63 touchdowns as a sophomore, 75 as a junior. That's got to be wrong.
Wow.
That's just stupid.
He threw
That's
like 2-something in his
insane.
career, man. It was crazy.
That's insane. That's just dumb.
Yep.
But he had like 40 touchdowns the year that they went to the playoff and then just fell off a cliff.
And then he had like 16 the next year.
Yeah, just fell off
crazy.
a cliff. And the whole program fell off a cliff. So back to this conversation, Ryan, I do think that when I look at this, I'm good with the decision they've made. Give him that offer if he wants it, because he is a little older than some kids in his class, which he's not abnormally old. He's actually a month older than I would, a month younger than me when I graduated. And I wasn't held back. I didn't repeat a 8th grade or anything like that, like a lot of people are saying. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I'm just saying he's got one of those weird spring, like summer birthdays where it's like, okay, do you start him early or do you start him late? That's kind of what happened with me. So I was 18 my whole senior year, turned 19 in May, and JT or CJ will turn 19 in like June, I think, after his senior year. So it's not like Jimmy Clausen where he's going to be 20, during his first semester at Notre Dame. It's not going to be that kind of deal. So anyway, so then we look on the 23 class, right? We've addressed the reclassification. We've kind of stayed away from it until the Dante decision was done. And now we can kind of, get it out there. And I don't think that was necessarily a deciding factor for Dante, but it was a factor along with other things in the way that it was reported and all that type of stuff. It was reported as a much more definitive thing from what people have sent me. It was reported as much more definitive thing than it ever actually was. So that's why Notre Dame is looking at 2023 quarterbacks. As we said before, it's in a very loaded class. A lot of kids are committed, but there's still a lot of uncommitted kids. But when you're Notre Dame and you are the program that they've been the last 5 years, a kid being committed somewhere else shouldn't scare you. And I think that's where Notre Dame is. But you also have to be careful because you don't want to try to flip a kid that you're probably not going to be able to flip, which means, you don't necessarily revisit the Jackson Arnold and Chris Vazina routes. You maybe give them a call, but they're probably going to feel like they were spurned for Dante, which they were. It's just fine. I'm glad that they can feel the way that they feel about it. That's totally fair. So you're going to go to kids that maybe are ascending, kids that maybe weren't guys that you turned down initially. And so there's several players on the board. We're going to talk about 2 of them today. The 3 players that most of my intel have given me that Notre Dame is looking at is Austin Novosad from Texas, Kenny Minchey from Tennessee, and Brock Glenn from Tennessee. I think the first 2, Ryan, are who we're going to talk about today. Yep. And the guys that I think are going to get a lot of Notre Dame's focus here as they move forward. So let's begin. So what we're going to do is we actually have some film. John Garcia, who is going to join us later in the show. He is obviously the director of recruiting at SI All-American. So he's the SI All-American version of Ryan. And he's going to join us. John had a chance to see both of those quarterbacks in person at the Elite 11s. I think he saw Minchey twice. I'm going to have to ask him about that. So we'll get his opinion of them and just kind of what he's seen and from them. He was obviously out in LA for the Elite 11. And the cool thing about that is, Ryan, is and Brian Smith talked about this on the message board at Irish Breakdown. So you would have read this yesterday. Mm-hmm. So the thing with the quarterbacks is it's not just it's not like a normal camp where they just go and they just throw and they go through one-on-ones and drills and just throw. They get these kids on the board. They talk ball with them. They go over coverages. They go over route concepts. They do all that stuff to really test them mentally as well. And these 2 kids are guys that I heard back during the event had really impressed some people with that. And Brian Smith on the Irish Breakdown message board said that Trent Dilfer, who is a big part of the Elite 11, came to him and said, without even being prompted, that Kenny Minchey was the best kid that they had on the board. Meaning like his just feel for game. And that backs up intel that I've been able to gather from sources about why schools like him. Not only is he a talented player, but this is a kid that's supposedly like a really wicked, smart quarterback. And that's something that you're seeing Tommy Rees really focus a lot on is big arms are important, right? There's a lot of people say, go offer Eli Holstein. I don't know if that's necessarily a guy that Notre Dame would pursue when you think about what they're looking for. They're looking for talented kids, but they're looking for talented kids with a really high football IQ. And, after kind of what we saw with like Ian Book and some different things, who was actually a talented player. We always felt he was a talented player, but he wasn't a guy that necessarily had that super, super high football feel for the game. And that's something that Tommy Rees really, really wants. He wants a more talented version of Jack Cohn is really essentially what he's looking for. What a lot of people don't realize is they think Tyler Buckner is that guy. And that's why I kind of laugh at the stuff like, oh, he's a runner. He got to learn to pass. Like he's like 2017 Wimbush or something like that. Like that's not who Tyler Buckner is. And we'll find that out this fall. But when you look at the two players on the board at the top, I think that's why they have separated themselves. And Austin Novosad, especially with getting his offer yesterday, those two, Novosad and Minchey, have separated themselves because of what the staff has learned about their ability for football intake. And that's a big part of what they're looking for at this point in time. And I think that's important for Notre Dame.
And I love that we're watching film because obviously we're film guys, but also I think that that football intelligence pops on both players' films. Like I think that you can watch and you can just kind of see deciphering coverages and working through progressions, just feel in the pocket. Like there's just kind of an innate feel to how to play the quarterback position from both regards. I also love it too, Brian, because we are comparing two football players in this conversation that are completely different, right? Like you talked that they both have that football savviness and understanding. That's kind of the commonality between the two, but they're both very different football players, which makes it fun. Like you have options that are not just like you mentioned, we want a more talented Jack Cohn, right? But you also have two players that aren't mirrors to Jack Cohn. Like they both are different players in their own respect. Like I would argue that Austin Novosad has some things that remind me a little bit of Jack Cohn, but there's not much about Kenny Minchey's game that reminds me at all of Jack Cohn, right? So I think it's cool that you have a commonality of what you're looking for, but also you have players with completely different traits that can fill that need. I think that makes it a pretty cool conversation.
So let's begin with Austin Novosad, Ryan. He is a kid from Dripping Springs, Texas. You were talking about kind of silly stats earlier, and I was looking up Austin Novosad's stats, and I kind of was typing them into an article, and I just typed them in, and I was like, well, those are really good numbers. And then I started like, hold on a second, let me do the math here. And you started looking at what his career numbers are based on the number of games he's played, and it's kind of silly. I mean, his numbers are kind of silly, and I didn't really think about it. He's played 19 games of high school football because as a sophomore, his first year was a COVID-shortened year, I believe. But he played 8 games as a sophomore, and they played 11 last year. They went 10-0 in the regular season and lost in the playoffs. In just 19 games, he has passed for 6,072 yards. He's passed for 75 touchdowns and 13 picks in 19 games. Now, the picks are a little high. He had 9 this year for 11, but when you watch him play, you see why. There's some picks that are happening because they're bouncing off of his receiver's hands, and he's a pretty gutsy kid, and so those things have to get kind of worked through a little bit, but I kind of like it. It's one of those things I always said around it. I'd rather have to tamp a guy down than force a guy to try to make a throw, and that's what Austin is. He's 64.5% career completion percentage. And again, just silly numbers. And the other thing I like is he's a touchdown machine. And this is kind of what you talked about. And he's played 19 games, and 12 of them he's thrown at least 4 touchdowns. He's had 3 games where he's thrown 7 touchdowns in a game.
That's crazy.
And which is just, it's really impressive. So, I mean, I'm looking at his numbers here. It's like 4, 6, 5, 7, 5, 1, 4, 3, 0, and then 4. Right. And so and that's this past year. And so in the game that they lost, he completed 62.5% of his passes, threw for 388 yards and 4 touchdowns in a 63-56 loss. So I'm not putting that one on Austin Novosad. Right. So, anyway, productive kid, doesn't play in like a great level of Texas football, but there's a lot of talent. And he's a kid that committed to Baylor very early in the process when he was a relative unknown. His junior season and then kind of how things have shaken out have caused a lot of people to take a second look at him. So we'll talk about his recruitment first, then we'll dive into the film of Austin. As we're kind of talking through his film, we'll do some other things like we'll pop in their Elite 11 clip so you can see that as we're talking as well, Ryan. So let's begin with Austin Novosad. There's really 3 schools in contention for him right now. Ohio State, Texas A&M, where I believe at least one of his parents went, and then Notre Dame. What I can say is from what I understand about how Notre Dame is going to go about this recruiting process, they're not going to just offer kids to offer them. They're going to offer them if they believe there's some level of interest. Like I think it would be silly for Notre Dame to offer a kid, and then let's say 3 days later he commits somewhere else. like they're doing their due diligence before the offers go out to see if this is a kid that would, will you come visit? Will you have definite interest in those type of things? Sure. And so I think those are the things that you look at and say, okay, that this is a kid that to some degree has expressed a level of interest. So like right now, I think it's going to come down to, to Ohio State, who people thought a couple weeks ago he was getting ready to commit to Ohio State, is what our intel said. Didn't do that. A&M's involved, and now Notre Dame's involved, and it does sound like there's legitimate interest between the two parties.
Yeah, I think that the offered him just in general, I think is a good sign, right? Because like you said, they're probing and making sure that like, hey, you have legitimate interest if we show legitimate interest back. Because I think that's a big part of this conversation, right? Like you don't want to, you're in a little bit of a weird time, right? Because a lot of quarterbacks have come off the board. You obviously played the long game with Dante Moore, but it's now you're in a situation where like you need to get stuff done here a little quicker, right? Like there's a little bit of an urgency to this situation right now. So Austin's a kid where, hey, was under recruited early, but he is, like he plays high school football in Texas. He's had some great numbers. He goes to camps. He has really good showings pretty consistently all the way through. And like you said, Ohio State wants him bad, man. Like this is the guy that they want as their quarterback in this class, right? Like, and yeah, I think that it's showing volumes that I think Notre Dame's making an effort to get him on campus and do all that type of thing. But just the general fact that he was perceived to be the chosen guy to be the guy for Notre Dame now. Cause I mean, they like we'll talk about Kenny Minchey as well. They have eye interest there as well, but also Novosad's a guy that Notre Dame's been, keeping tabs with a little bit now. And he's kind of the guy for them, I think. So,
yeah. Speaking to the Ohio State interest. So basically from what I'm told, two guys at Ohio State really zeroed in on at one point, among others, was Novosad and Brock Glenn.
Yep.
And Novosad is the guy that they kind of went towards more. And it's Notre Dame has done a similar thing, and other schools have, because Brock Glenn, of the quarterbacks we've talked about, probably has the livest arm of all of them. Yeah. And he's definitely the best athlete of all three of the kids that we would talk about today. It's just, again, it comes down to a lot of schools are like Ohio State and Notre Dame are very similar. And I will sacrifice elite physical tools for an elite mind if I have to. I want a guy with both. Sure. That's always the goal, is both.
Yeah.
But I'll sacrifice that because it's about running the offense with precision. We're going to recruit elite players around you. That's what Notre Dame is trying to do. That's what Ohio State has been doing. You need a guy that can be that trigger man. And if he's the more talented he is, the better it's going to be.
Yep.
And so when you look at Novosad, I think he brings a lot of that table. Now the physical tools are still good, Ryan, and there's no mistaking that. But he doesn't have the arm that Chris Vizina has, or some of these other traits. He's not the big bodied kid, that Arch Manning is, or that Jaden Rashada is. He doesn't have the bazooka that Rashada has, or that Nico has. But there's a lot of tools to work with, and as you said, he is an ascending player. The key now for Notre Dame with Novosad and what they're working on is trying to get him on campus for a visit. That's the next step. Now, my understanding is he has not committed to visiting, but there's been enough of a conversation with the parties that I think Notre Dame was comfortable enough with that potentially happening that they were willing to throw out the offer to him. 100%. And so that's kind of where things are in that regard, Ryan, with those two. So we're not saying it's going to happen. It's not locked in. We've heard from enough sources that I do think there's a chance that Novosad could potentially visit Notre Dame at some point in time this summer, or at least say, hey, I can't decide right now. I'm going to carry this into the fall and go that way. I think Notre Dame would prefer that he make a sooner decision, but just it'd be for them, not Ohio State or Texas A&M. But it is interesting in this quarterback domino situation that if you think of the schools where all these quarterbacks are going, and this is kind of leads into the whole who's going to have the number one ranked recruiting class type of thing. Alabama got two, top 100 quarterbacks, but a lot of these other big time schools don't have quarterback. Ohio State doesn't have a quarterback. Notre Dame doesn't have a quarterback. Georgia doesn't have a quarterback. Texas A&M doesn't have a quarterback. LSU doesn't have a quarterback. It's a really strange situation. And really Dante Moore went to Oregon. Nico went to Tennessee. Jaden Rashada went to Miami. Arch went to Texas, right? So
Ricky Collins at Purdue, like a lot of talented quarterbacks.
What's interesting with him is that's a fascinating one, and I have so much respect for Ricky Collins right now. And if he decides to flip at the end of the process, kind of like Drew Tranquill did late, I'll understand it. But Purdue got on him when everybody else was treating Ricky like you're a third or fourth guy. We're waiting on Arch and Dante and Rashad and all these guys. And Ricky said, "There's a system. There's a school up in Purdue who had a flipping walk-on quarterback throw for a bunch of yards last year, who it can't sniff Ricky Collins as a talented player. They wanted me. They were my team. They believed in me. They gave me a chance when everybody else was telling me I had to wait for somebody else."
Yeah.
And now that those schools are all coming around, LSU's worked hard to try to flip him. Michigan has tried to land him. He's pretty much told them all to pound sand. And my understanding is that it wouldn't shock me if I don't know this. It's my understanding that Notre Dame did like Ricky early in the process as well. It's just he was below other guys because they did reach out. And there was some conversation, but they just like Dante and a couple guys, Jackson Arnold, Chris Vazina better. Mm-hmm. And so then, of course, from there, they then winded down all the way down to Dante. And so when you look at Ricky, I wouldn't be shocked if Notre Dame reached out. I haven't been told that they will or won't. I wouldn't be shocked by it, but I don't think it would matter. And right. Ryan, you made a good point. Like, look, the kid's clearly willing to leave the area, but I think it's not so much about a desire to play in Indiana as it is a loyalty to the program that wanted him when nobody else wanted him. At least none of the other big-time programs wanted him. And now that they all came around, he's not going to just bail on Purdue just because of that. And I got to tell you, man, I have a great deal of respect for that, but it also shows me this is a smart kid because with all due respect to the big names, when you look at, for example, Georgia, Notre Dame, have either one of those two schools shown you the ability to produce quarterbacks at a better rate than what Jeff Brom has done at Western Kentucky and Purdue? I mean, look what he's doing with walk-ons.
I was going to say I don't think we've ever talked about Jeff Brom, but I mean I would want to play quarterback in Jeff Brom's system.
The guy had a walk-on quarterback throw for 3,708 yards and 28 touchdowns last year, and that kid would be fourth string at Notre Dame last year.
Yes, agree.
And he's almost going for $4,000, and he didn't even start the first 3 games of the year because they had Jack Plummer.
Yeah, he pushed out. Aiden O'Connell pushed out Jack Plummer, who's a much more talented player. I mean, it's the cerebral qualities, right? Whereas the Jeff Brom, to your point, right? So yeah.
So before we dive into the film, I do want to bring in John Garcia to the show. John, welcome, buddy. Yeah, it's good, man. It's been a while. So you just picked the perfect time. We're getting ready to dive into film. I knew you were just kind of hanging out like, well, I'm going to wait till they start watching film. So we're talking about Austin Novosad, and we're kind of going through his recruitment and sort of his ascension into the rankings, him becoming a top player, possible guys that Notre Dame could look at. We're talking about Ricky Collins and his loyalty to Purdue. So we're getting ready to jump into Austin Novosad's film. But John, before we did that, I did want to give you first a chance to kind of speak to kind of what you've seen. Obviously, there's the film, but then there's the summer workouts. You've had a chance to see him up close and personal. What are the things that stood out from you, and what's some of the things you've heard about Austin Novosad when you were out at the Elite 11?
Well, the first time I saw him was at the regional, I believe in Dallas. And that day he set the accuracy mark in the pro day script that they work out with these guys. No senior threw more accurately throughout that regional tour than he did. I think he hit a 22. The only guy who beat him was CJ Carr.
I was getting ready to bring that up. Thank you, John. You read my mind.
he hit a 23. So yeah, those are kind of the two guys from the accuracy standpoint. And that really carries over, not the biggest, most athletic, livest arm, but man, just so consistent. And there's a lot of mobility. There's a competitiveness with him. And I think that's the biggest takeaway is you talk to him and he's just a different kid. He's kind of going to do his own thing. And I think that's why his recruitment is so unique, because you think about some of the programs that are after him, and he's committed to Baylor, and then Ohio State and A&M are aggressively trying to flip him. So optically, you're like, okay, he's going to flip. But then you talk to him, and you're like, I don't know, man. If any kid's going to stick with Baylor, it would be this kid, even though he's an A&M legacy, even though Ohio State, quarterback-wise, has been doing whatever it wants at the position. So I was curious to see how he would react to Notre Dame, because Georgia tried to come in, a couple other schools have tried to come in, and he kind of said no thanks. So again, he's his own kid. So Notre Dame coming in, I thought would be quite interesting. I'm just getting a few messages from him this morning and this afternoon, and he's definitely going to vet Notre Dame. There's no doubt about it. The question mark becomes, how much does this push his timeline? Because really, he was trying to lock something in, make a final call this month if possible. So,
that was Notre Dame's hold off on offering him, is they didn't want to offer him, and then he wasn't willing to you know, like you said, go through the process with them and then make a decision in 5 days. You know what I mean?
Shut it
And
down.
go to Ohio State or shut it, flip to A&M or go with Baylor. So that was part of Notre Dame's vetting process as well. One thing I want to add too is, from what I'm told from a couple different sources, part of the reason Baylor was his initial choice, and he is a little bit more interested in Notre Dame than others, is he is a very strong Christian, faith, very strong. I shouldn't say very strong with his faith, right? It's very important to him, and that's part of the thing he liked about Baylor. Baylor is a Baptist school. It's a Christian school. Notre Dame obviously is a Catholic school, which is different than Baptist, right? But still a school of that where faith is something that is emphasized. And so I've been told that that's also something that's going to play, not maybe the determining factor, but will be part of the weighing his options process for Austin, from what I'm told, John. I don't know if that's something that you can speak to or what, but that's something I've been told too.
Yeah, he's brought that up organically a couple of times with me, including back in the spring when we only talked about Baylor because there was really no other threat at the time. Yeah, he said that was one of the reasons that he picked the Bears, and that's part of the reason why there was confidence in Waco, even with A&M coming in, where both of his parents went. There was still confidence in Baylor holding them off. I think Ohio State was the one they began to worry about, and now obviously Notre Dame is in that same light. So I do think that will be quite interesting down the stretch comparatively. And look, obviously not every kid is Catholic that's on the Notre Dame roster. I think that's not a secret or anything like that. So I think that
a lot aren't.
Interesting.
Yeah, a lot of them aren't. I mean, they've had Muslim kids, Mormon kids, Christian kids. I mean, it's not a prerequisite. You don't have to. You don't have to take religion classes at Notre Dame. That's something that people have used to negatively recruit against Notre Dame in the past. You have to be Catholic. You have to take these religion classes. And it's like, no, you don't. I just find it funny that people have tried to use that. But John, let's talk a little bit about him as a player. And we're going to pull up the film here and we're going to break it down. So the next part of this sort of look at Austin Novosad is going to be our film room. So I want to pull up his film and dive into that as we're talking, so people can get a good sense of what this kid is all about. So we're gonna let him take center stage. Not everybody has to look at us. So let's dive into this, guys, and just kind of, John, share your thoughts, and Ryan and I will continue to share ours as well when you watch them. But first thing two things for me, guys, that I notice is, like you said, number one, not a big bazooka arm, but he throws one of the best deep balls in this class, in my opinion.
And he does it without utilizing his whole body. He's not the biggest guy in the world, 6'2", 185, 190 or whatever it is. A lot of these guys at the Elite 11 in particular really have to utilize their core, their lower half, and you almost see it when they get rid of the football. I think with Austin, it is relatively natural. The motion is quick enough. It actually looks a little quicker than we're seeing here on tape. I think he's tightened up.
He's sped it up.
Yeah, just a little bit as you would expect from that natural progression. And I think kind of the underrated element is the mobility. I think he can work the RPO game, keep a defense honest to a degree. And he didn't have to do it a whole lot on Friday nights, but in some of these drills and situations where you're designed to be uncomfortable, you see him on the move here a little bit. He looked very comfortable outside on the pocket, even rolling left. Some of the more difficult situations they tried to put him in, there were times where he looked better than CJ Stroud and Bryce Young in some of these drills. So I think there's a lot of kind of unknown with Austin that really works. But on the surface level, quick trigger, quick processor, accurate, protects the football, and he's productive. I mean, that's kind of the foundation, right? We get away from that a little bit, but when we're talking quarterbacks, production needs to be talked about almost as much as possible in my mind.
I think there's a couple things for me. Number one, about the throwing motion. I think what I saw on film from him as a junior, his throwing motion, his body, it was almost like a dead ringer for how Jack Cohn throws a football at Notre Dame this past year. Now, when you watch his summer film, his motion has changed. He doesn't look like Jack anymore. And when I watch it, John, I think, number one, I think he does use his core a little bit better in the 7-on-7 events. And this is true for a lot of kids. It's easier to kind of really get into the, plant your feet and drive when there's no pass rush and there's not a game being played. The other thing, too, is the ball's jumping out of his hand a lot more with a lot more explosiveness this summer than in the fall, which, again, when you look at the release was a little bit longer in the fall, when you have to muscle up a little bit to get more zip on the ball, it's gonna lengthen your throwing motion. So when as his arm, I think, has gotten stronger, as he's physically matured, I think that's another thing that allowed him to speed up his release, is he doesn't have to put as much, emphasis on it with his upper body. And I think those two things are partly why his release has been sped up. But then the other thing is this throw right here. His feel for ball placement is really good. Like, this ball has to be on the back hip. If he leads this guy, it's getting picked off or it's getting batted down. This has to be a back shoulder throw. And his touch on the deep balls too, John, he is about as good as I've seen as putting that sucker on that outside shoulder. His timing, I mean, he's throwing the ball here. This kid's not even into his break yet. Watch this corner.
And he's not even
here.
stepping into it. That's what I like.
Right.
I'm like, that's a quick trigger. I'm like, get the ball there regardless of the mechanics at some point, which you have to do, of course.
Right. This is another example. I mean, just his ball placement as a passer is really impressive, to where if he does continue to see a jump in arm strength, that's going to make it more effective, because now he's going to be able to get even more of those balls over the top. The other thing too, John, for a guy that doesn't have like a bazooka for an arm, he's a pretty gritty thrower. There's some game film out there where he's taking chances. I mean, he's going to throw the ball into tight coverage. He's going to put that sucker over the middle. And there's a lot of talent. Like I said, there's a lot of arm talent here, even if he doesn't have necessarily the Jaden Rashada, Nico, Eli Holstein, just arm power. He's got a lot of arm talent, in my opinion.
Yeah, and he's confident. I think that's, we talk about ball distributors, point guards on the field, all that, and it's kind of a negative connotation, like, oh, he's efficient, blah, blah, blah. He's confident. And like you said, he takes those chances. That was one of my first notes before the Elite 11. I was kind of doing like a preview, and I was like, man, he really trusts his arm, and he'll throw a guy open at the high school level, just things that you don't really see as much. And I think that has to do with his roster. It's not, Dripping Springs is not Austin Westlake or South.
He's not
Lake
throwing to
Carroll.
Braylon James and Jaden Greathouse in high school.
Yeah, which is a good thing.
Right. This is another one that I like. This is just, he does a lot of this stuff, Ryan. Ryan, what are some things that kind of, as you watch through this film and as you've watched through Austin, I know you started watching him before. Ryan and I started watching this kid's film a couple weeks ago when he was kind of put on our radar. What are some things that you're seeing and that pop out to you, Ryan, when you watch this kid on film?
Yeah, I mean, I like John's point about, he's a little bit of a flat-footed thrower right now, right? And there's a natural progression that's going to happen from a strength perspective, because, I mean, again, like John said, he's 185, 190 soaking wet right now. There's a natural strength aspect that's going to improve as he just keeps filling out his body. But I think what you see, and reason I think that his arm strength is going to take a huge jump, is when he's working quick game or he's working some RPO concepts that kind of force his weight forward and to distribute forward. I think that you see the ball come out with a lot of juice. And I think that he just gets a little comfortable in that back foot when he's working a little bit of a deeper drop or out of the gun without play action. But even on that last one, you saw like when he's able to kind of step into it off of the play action move, like that ball is coming out of his hand quickly and it's got a lot of velocity behind it. So he has the baseline. He obviously has great ball placement to him, and I think that his arm strength is going to take a huge jump. I kind of put into the piece this week on the mailbag, Brian. He reminds me as a thrower, and again, I'm not predicting this kid's going to be the first pick in the draft, but he reminds me of Jared Goff a little bit as far as a thrower. And I think Jared Goff kind of gets that same designation as a, he's not a strong-armed passer. He's just kind of a guy that's a solid distributor and doesn't take a lot of bad chances. But I think that there's a big misnomer there, because if you watch Jared Goff has a live arm. The ball comes out of his hand well, and that's what I see with this kid. He might not be the fleetest of foot. He might not be Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen arm strength, but I think when he kind of gets his mechanics together and he continues to fill out, that ball is just going to continue to jump off his hand even quicker than it already does.
I'll take college version of Jared Goff.
Right? 100%. 100%.
Sign me up, brother. I'll take that in a heartbeat. No question. I think the thing I like too, guys, about him, and we've talked about ball placement and accuracy, and John, I think Ryan, I think you pointed out he's not a great athlete, but John, I think you also pointed out but he uses his feet in the pocket really effectively, and if you do leave a crease, he will step up and run into it, which I you don't have to be a great athlete. Tom Brady has shown this. You don't have to be a great athlete to be really good in the pocket. Peyton Manning I'm not comparing the kid to Peyton Manning and Tom Brady, you get my point, but you don't have to be a great athlete to have great pocket mobility. And I think he has a really good feel for the game. And that's what we talked about before you joined, John, is Notre Dame And I think a lot of schools are putting a premium on high IQ football players. And you're watching this kid as a junior in high school banging corner routes before guys are not only out of their break, before they're into their break. And he's just putting it out there with touch. You saw the one later in the film where he literally, because there's a rush, he kind of drops that ball out towards the sideline, and the kid runs underneath it with a safety, a linebacker, and a corner, like all kind of triangle, that route. That's the kind of stuff you look for on film. Does this kid show the anticipation? Does this kid is he able to get the ball out in space and let his receivers go make plays? If he's showing that kind of confidence in his receivers at Dripping Springs, what's he going to be like if he gets a Braylon James, a Ronan Hannafin, a Jaden Greathouse, a Rico Flores, a Tobias Merriweather, who I think right now, I think SI All-American is the only outlet that had Tobias Merriweather properly ranked last year. But he's going to have guys, Eli Raridan, Holden Stace. I mean, he's going to have those. What kind of confidence is he going to have when he's got those kind of cats? And I think that's when he also started to jump as he plays on that 7-7 team, I believe, with Braylon James and Jaden Greathouse and guys like that. And that's from, talking to some people, that's kind of when his game started to really get noticed. Because you talked about this, John. Even at the Elite 11 in Dallas, he wasn't a kid that had all these high school or these colleges coming after him. It wasn't until he got deeper into the summer that people were like, oh, this cat can play. This cat's pretty good. And that's when you saw his recruitment blow up, even with other uncommitted guys.
That's a great point, because we were there in Dallas, and look, that's a loaded camp every year, right? And Jackson Arnold's throwing off his back foot, looking amazing. And then some of these other guys, J.J. Cole was there, Flores was there, the Okie State commit. And then you just kind of were like, who's this blonde dude? Like, he just keeps ripping it. And you're like, oh, that's the Baylor commit. And then, like, by hour 3, you're like, okay, yeah, the Baylor commit is going to lead this thing. And then we'll go from there with the rest of the evaluation. And I think, he just kind of sneaks up on you. And I think you mentioned a great point, Brian. When you start to think about his projection at the next level, regardless of where he ends up, but particularly Notre Dame and the style of receiver they're bringing in, there's some size variance, but there's a lot of bigger guys, right? Bigger, longer, ball skill kind of guys. When you throw with confidence and anticipation, what does that open up? 50-50 balls, back shoulder balls. Some of those, just you and me locked in as a quarterback and receiver. No one else is even on our same page, but we're going to work this defensive back based on his leverage, down and distance, the sidelines, et cetera. And so I think he can kind of exhibit some of those things. And then the second thing is, back at the Elite 11 finals, the second day is my favorite day. It's the pro day script. Every single quarterback, whether he's a college kid or a high school kid, works the same 20 throws. And Novosad had like the hottest run within those 20 throws. I think he hit, we chart 1, 2, 3. 3 is the perfect throw. 2 is on target, but not perfect. 1 is just a miss. He had the streak of the most 3s in a row. I think he did 7 in a row. So there's a bit of jump shooter rhythm to this kid's game, which when you start to pair with the confidence and the efficiency, it kind of works really, really nicely together. And he becomes kind of this modern quarterback projection, even though he's not the most fleet of foot, like we talked about. So there's a confidence with him that's kind of quiet, which is good, and certainly fits Notre Dame to a T. But I think that's why he's just still hot on the trail. People are just digging into it more and like, oh man, we missed on this kid. We need to jump in as soon as possible. And again, he's said no thanks to a few in between some of these. Oh, that's great. Let me post this offer on Twitter. He's had a couple big time no thanks, which tells me a lot about him off the field as well.
Can I say something about J.J. Cole? He's the most disappointing quarterback in this class. How is Cole's kid not a kicker?
And he's 6'6". It's
how is he not a kick? His dad literally runs a kicking camp, and he's a quarterback. Like, come on! No, he's actually a really good quarterback. I saw him. What was it? I think it was at the. Was it at the Ohio? I think it was at the Ohio. Under Armour, like not this past April, but the April before, with Dante Moore. And I mean, I'm watching him play, and I'm like, this kid's got a pretty live arm. Dante was the best kid at that event. I liked Brady Allen too. But like, I watched J.J. Cole look a whole lot better than, I think that's the event I saw him at an event. I think that's the one that he was at. He looked a whole lot better than, the Taven Jackson kid that's going to Tennessee and some of those other kids. He's good. He's good. Yeah, and he's gotten bigger and stronger, and his arm has gotten stronger, and we'll talk about that. But I'm just disappointed he's not a kicker or punter. I'm just really disappointed in that. When you know who his dad is.
Janikowski size.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's what his dad does.
Just got another DM from Austin. I asked, I was like, hey, are you still trying to do something here in July, or is this going to slow things down? And he said, quote, I'm not sure yet. It might slow down a little just so I can get a real feel for the Notre Dame staff. So he's definitely going to vet this offer as much as he could. I don't know if he'll get up for a visit or anything like that, but he's definitely going to try to allow Tommy Rees and those guys to help him catch up on Notre Dame. But
and
he
that
does have
fits,
official visits remaining, so
and it fits with the what we know of where Notre Dame is coming from. They're not just going to start throwing out offers to kids unless they genuinely feel, number one, they like him, and then number two, there is at least a genuine interest in taking this to the next level in some capacity. And so that's why I think they're also going to be slower than the offer. I think Notre Dame fans are waiting for Notre Dame to throw out like 15 offers to the next 15 best quarterbacks, and that's just not how they're going to play this game. So that is going to be part of it. So let's jump, guys, into the next player, and that's Kenny Minchey. And I think flat out one of the most underrated players in the country. And we actually did a breakdown of him last year in March, or I think it was May, when Notre Dame's board was evolving. It's like not this past May, but like 14 months ago May. And I remember watching this film then. I'm like, I love this kid. He just doesn't have the physical tools of the other guys. I called him a tier 2 guy because he had a great feel for the game, but at the time, the ball just didn't really jump out of his hand. He was like maybe 6 feet tall. And I really liked this film. And then you fast forward to his junior year and then this summer, and he's, I talked to somebody close to the Irish program and who's familiar with like what they're doing. And he said when he worked out at Notre Dame's camp last year and they liked him a lot, but he was like barely 6 feet tall. And now he's closer to 6'2". He's grown over an inch. He's really, he looks like a bowling ball. This lower half is like really thick. His arm has jumped a ton from his sophomore to junior year. And I'm watching that kid play now. I'm like, that's a top 200 football player. Like there is no doubt that is at least a top 200 football player that's committed. He's a Pitt commit. I don't think he's necessarily looking to leave Pitt. I think it's just if the right program comes along, this is a kid that would entertain it. I know that Notre Dame and him have talked. That's all I can tell you. At this point in time, there's another, we'll see kind of where it goes next. But I don't think he's necessarily a kid that's looking to leave. But he goes to Pope John Paul II. That last I checked, that's Catholic, right? But it's also the home of Golden Tate. So there's obviously some connection there. That's where Golden Tate played high school. So, and he's a kid that's worked out at Notre Dame and visited Notre Dame and, in the past for camps. He's a very intriguing player, John, because he is a guy that's going to be very under the radar. But every time I read a report about Elite 11, everybody would always have to throw in a Kenny Minchey reference from that event. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, kind of similar to Austin. Like you just watch the event and he's just there. He just forces his hand there. It's not with any one head-turning physical trait. It's just a combination. And he's so darn productive and consistent. I think he started off, we ranked every kid every day. I think he was 9th the first day, 7th the second day, 5th the third day, finished 5th. We do a composite of like, hey, this is how it was all week. And he finished 5th. Nobody would have predicted that going into the Elite 11, but that's just kind of who Kenny Minchey is. And I like that you brought up that he was a little bit shorter before, because you watch him throw, and look, he's extremely productive. He's got some good mobility, but look at the higher release point. You can tell that early in his development, they were like, hey, we need you closer to 90 degrees than the typical 3/4 release there. So as he's grown taller now, it kind of comes together much more smooth and a little bit more natural looking. But the trigger is pretty quick here, and the competitiveness really showed up. Just super consistent. This was a poor choice of my angle to shoot at the Elite 11 because the sun was beating me up a little bit, California style. But you still get the gist of what was happening. Look at that on the run, 7 cut towards the front pylon.
Look at that lower half, though, guys.
A lot of guys struggle with it, and that's the other thing. He strikes you with that physicality, and it shows up. Nothing looks hard for him. He just he's not sweating. He's just kind of there in motion. He's just like one of those jump shooters that you're like, man, he's not even working hard, and then he's got 30 points at the end of the night. I like.
If you look at, I just want to interrupt you real quick, John, with this clip, because this is John masterfully took this video, so we're going to point it out. If you looked at Kenny Minchey from the waist down, you'd think he was like a running back or a linebacker. He's got a really thick lower half. That's important for a quarterback because that's where a lot of that power comes from. You got a really strong lower half. You're going to have a more natural drive to where you don't have to force yourself to push off that back foot because you have that natural. It's like a leaper, right? Like some guys can leap 36 inches, but they've got to put everything they have into jumping 36 inches. Some guys can jump 36 inches like it's nothing. And if they really tried, they're going to 40, right? That same thing with a quarterback. If you have a very strong lower half, then you don't have to force yourself to drive off that back leg as much because you already have that natural lower body strength. And so that's why I put this out. If you look at his core and his lower body, he's got a very thick, strong lower body, which is going to lead to him being a player that's going to have a really powerful lower half. And it's also going to result in him being a guy that can really stand steady in the pocket as well when pressure comes, which is something you're going to want to look for with a kid who maybe doesn't have that 6'5", see over the field, that kind of thing. And so I think those are things that this film gives us a really good example of that maybe we might not be able to see on just normal high school film taken from the top of the stadium. So I wanted to point that part of his game out too. But John, you point out, very clean, compact release. And because he's got the way his release is, I think it helps with the accuracy. But what I like about him too, and we're going to see this on film as we pull it up, guys, this is a kid also that can play off platform really effectively. And he's got some gun. When you watch him at Elite 11, you see one kid. You see the like you said, this kid's been coached on how to play quarterback.
Mhm.
Brian Smith, we were talking earlier, had mentioned that he got unprompted, had people reaching out about how good this kid is on the board. Like, this is a wicked smart kid. Our sources have also told us that, like, one of the things they like about him is this kid's got as high of a football IQ as anybody in the class. That's something that I was told a while ago, and it was reiterated to me again recently. So the mind is there. But the thing I like about him is you see the compact, the fundamentally sound kid on film at Elite 11. Then you pop in the game film and you see a kid that's got some street ball in him too. And that's what I love. I love quarterbacks that can do both. I can sit in the pocket and pick you apart if you make me. But if you want to get me off script, I can play some street ball too. That's what I love in a quarterback. And he's got some of that in him too. And we're going to see that as we pop up his junior film here in a second.
And he's got great hair too. Don't leave the most
Should
important
be
part
known,
out.
absolutely.
Yes.
It should
Yes.
be known.
He just like he sneaks up on you, but his demeanor's the same. I mean,
Mhm.
these other kids are like, they miss a ball and they're like, oh man, they're cursing. They're like Jaden Rashada's like putting his hands on his head when he misses a ball. Caleb Williams is like yelling at Quincy Avery. Like, all these guys are so different personality wise. Kenny Minchey is like, he's just sitting in the car, waiting in a drive-through line. He's just kind of hanging out, no matter the setting. And I thought that was really interesting. And at the regional, it was in Tennessee. It was like the hottest regional, hotter than Texas, that we went to. Like, Nico Iamaleava was like puking. It's that hot, right? So again, even that day, Kenny Minchey is just kind of there. Just demeanor never changes, just kind of even keel. And leaving that workout, it was between him and Malachi Singleton that we're like, yo, these were the best two of the day here. Chris Parson was there as well. It was a really loaded Nashville regional. And even when he got the call, Kenny was just like, okay. Like, he's just like, yeah, I should have got the call. There's just no kind of rattling or shaking him, even on a day where even the coaches were like, this is an absurdly hot day. I mean, you never got any emotion out of Kenny. And I thought that was, especially on that day, I thought that was a big deal, because I definitely went straight to Target and bought like 6 Gatorades after that camp.
Who was another quarterback that was really good at that Tennessee camp on that really hot day? Was super accurate. Who was another one of those guys?
Oh, it was a young kid. I forget.
Kid from Michigan, right?
CJ.
What's his name? CJ Carr. That's it.
Yeah,
That's who it
he
is.
was the best there that day.
You wrote that. I actually have the article that you wrote at the time. Because you made a note in there, like, just so y'all know, this kid's not going to the finals because he's a junior and they don't invite juniors. But this was the best kid at the camp today. So
yeah.
you did note that. You did.
Like, other quarterbacks were watching CJ and they were like, "Oh my goodness, can you slow down?" Like, I'm trying to get written about today. And CJ was just on it, man. It was just the best. I've seen him 2 or 3 times live, and this was like the best by such a wide margin. And it wasn't because he was bad the other days. He was just on that day. It was just one of those days.
John, you spent a little bit of time. Sorry, Brian, just to
go for it
real quick. I know you were talking a little bit about just kind of the personality of a Kenny Minchey. He's just kind of like Austin Novosad too. He's kind of there, and he just kind of even keel, and he's got that conversation too. For Notre Dame fans out there, I think they would like to hear what was because you've been around obviously CJ in that type of event too. What was CJ's vibe, just to kind of get maybe a difference of an opinion from one person to the next?
Yeah, CJ was just kind of businesslike. He showed emotion. He knew when he was on. If he did miss one, he certainly gave himself a little bit of run for it. But it was very businesslike. I mean, he's just he's just polished, man. You can just tell that he's just been there and done that, to the point where, again, you were like, man, this kid can go compete. Everyone's talking about this year as like the year of the quarterback, and everyone there was like, yeah, he can go throw with these guys like immediately. Right. I mean, he grossly outthrew Iamaleava that day. It was just a clinic, and he approached it very businesslike. But there's some emotion there. There's certainly confidence there. Mm-hmm. That's a little bit more outward compared to an Austin Novosad, but it's not like to the highest degree where it's arrogant or anything like that. There's a lot of pro to CJ's game and his build. He looked so big that day.
He's filled out from where he was in the winter and as a sophomore.
I saw him in January backing up Dante Moore at a 7-on, and he was kind of skinny. He was a little skinnier. Looked like he was a younger guy, which he is still. But then in Nashville, I think that was the end of May, he looked filled out. Like he looked like he could, take a college script right now physically and get through it without, worrying about his health. So I thought that was encouraging. He just looked better. He looked bigger. Again, that posture, the professionalism, everything just kind of came together for him that day.
Let's get back to Kenny. I'm always about going off target if we're going to talk about a Notre Dame commit. That's always allowed, Ryan. So I'll allow it. Let's get back to Kenny Minchey, though, guys. I do want to pop in his film because I think people are going to like this, and a lot of fans that have watched this film have kind of came away like, "Ooh, I really like this kid." So let's kind of dive through this, guys. What you're seeing. Obviously the thing is you're going to see the mechanics like that right there. That's what you saw in the 7-on-7. Right? I mean, at the elite, really clean mechanics, drives off that back foot, the ball just jumps over top, gets up and down in a hurry. That's the thing I like about this is touch. This ball goes about 50 yards, a little under. So about 45 yards. He throws from the 45. It lands at about the 10. That's it's a 45-yard throw with ease. So you see the clean mechanics here, but then you're going to see here in a second, guys, when he starts playing off script, and this kid can flat out make a lot of plays off script.
Well, I love the fact that for me, we looked at Austin's film, and Kenny's different in the fact that his lower body does all the work for him. The release is clean and compact, but it's also like there's not a lot of wasted movement up top. Everything's kind of stays in line from the pocket perspective. And I mean, hats off to this coaching staff at his high school, because he has some of the cleaner mechanics that I've seen of any 2023 quarterback. He really stays composed. He stays aligned, and his lower body is what really does most of the work for him.
Right. Yep.
There's an ease to this kid. Mm-hmm. Like his motion is cleaner at the same stage, but kind of reminds me a bit of Jalen Hurts, where it's just like it seems like nothing bothers him. And
guys, he throws this ball from the 40, right? I just want to what John. I want to get you back on track, but I think you said what you just said at the perfect time. He throws this ball from the 40-yard line and he's flicking it like it's like it doesn't look like he's really doing much. Look how slow, not slow. Look how methodical. I guess that kind of the ease with which he kind of goes to the throwing zone on this throw. Right. I mean, and it goes 40 yards with no problem getting up and down in a hurry.
Man, that backside safety had no chance.
None.
Oh my gosh.
Poor guy.
Right. So John, back to your. I just wanted to point out like an example of it. So please get back to what you're saying about the ease, because I think those clips were really good examples of that.
Yeah, just like Ryan was saying, the lower body dominance really shows up, but there's just an ease on top of it that just kind of looks like he's hanging out. And I love that. That, like I said, that reminds me a bit of watching Jalen Hurts back in the day. But obviously Kenny, more polished from a passing standpoint mechanically. I mean, it's probably not even close to between the two. Of course, Jalen was a great runner and as strong as a quarterback as we've probably ever evaluated. But I think the thing with Kenny is a whole lot of third level stuff.
Right.
He's known to be consistent and the demeanor and all that. There's a whole lot of third level stuff, and it's all over the place, outside the numbers, down the seams.
This is an over 35-yard pass post route that doesn't even get off the screen, guys. I mean, it barely gets any trajectory. That's how easily he throws this ball. I mean, it gets over top, but like I don't think people understand how this was kind of my problem when I first watched him too, John, is sometimes guys with that ease of throwing can kind of mask just how well they're throwing it. You know what I mean? Like this is not as easy of a throw with the kind of velocity he makes it that it looks on film.
And he had to because the DB broke before the receiver on that play.
Right.
And he still fit it in. DB's breaking now.
Mm-hmm.
And he got it there. I mean, he took a horrible angle, but he broke first. So he had to put a little bit more mustard on it to get it there on time.
Yeah, and I love how live his arm is too, because you can see like when it makes contact with the wide receiver's hands, you can just see some guys, the ball kind of fades at the end a little bit, but the ball is consistent velocity. I mean, we talked about a couple of those throws that was like 40, 45 in the air, and they're kind of on ropes. Like he's not putting a ton of touch on these balls. I really do think that we're going to underrate kind of the liveness of this kid's arm.
Right.
I think he has some pace to him.
And that's why that lower body that's why I focus on that strong lower body earlier, guys, is because he doesn't have to juice up the upper body. Like we were pointing out with Novosad, he's a skinnier kid. He has to kind of maybe juice up that upper body a little bit more. I want to go back to these running clips here real quick, because neither of these kids are really runners. Kenny can run, but he's more of a chain mover type of runner. He's a good athlete, but he's not a runner. He is a pocket passer that he could run a read zone on 3rd and 5, pull it and pick up a first down. Right. Or if you drop 8, he can tuck it and run. He's not Brandon Wimbush. He's not Everett Golson. He's not Deshaun Kaiser, Malik Zaire. He is a pocket passer that also happens to be a decent athlete, in my opinion. Anybody want to disagree with that point about his game?
No, I would say that I really wouldn't. So he's not the same player of CJ Stroud, obviously, but like as a runner, I think they kind of are comparative in that way, where CJ Stroud's not a guy that you're going to design a ton of stuff with, but when he chooses to run, he can pick up a 3rd and 5 with his legs. Like he needs
to actually do that more, in my opinion.
Agreed, 100%.
If you go back and watch CJ Stroud's high school film compared to what he did last year, he needs to step up. He was looking like Dwayne Haskins at times last year, as far as just unwillingness to run. He's a much better athlete than Dwayne Haskins was. Yes. So I think that needs to become an even bigger part of his game. This is one of my favorite throws.
Tell that to Stephen A. Smith.
Oh my God, don't get me started. This is one of my favorite throws, guys, because this is mechanically something you never teach. He is stepping basically left to middle, and he sees this guy coming open, and he just throws it out.
Outside the numbers too.
Yes,
that's hard. That's hard.
That's what I'm saying. This is what we talk about off platform. This is exactly what we're talking about. His motion changes. His footwork is not there. But he's looking left, and he sees this kid come open, actually sees it a little bit later, but is able to react to it so quickly. But to get that ball out there that way, that is an impressive throw, guys.
And to John's point, too, it's outside the numbers, so that defender had no chance of that ball either. Like, it was in a clean spot.
Yeah. I like this throw right here. This is some gas. This is gas right here, guys, and he's doing it with ease. It's a 20-yard ball that he just throws like it's nothing. And now you go watch his sophomore film, and he's one of those kids, John, that you're like, that's not the same kid. I'm watching the wrong film. That's not the same kid.
He just another one, kind of like that outside the numbers ball, off platform to his strong side, and he still got it 30 yards through the air on a rope, like Ryan said. I mean, there's not a whole lot of hang time with some of these balls, and that's warranted more times than not.
But there's still touch on it. That's the unique thing that I really like. It's not like he's throwing line drives that, like John, some of those throws, like if you try to line drive that 35-yard post route, the DB on this film took a bad angle. But if that's Peyton Bowen or Caleb Downs, that ball's getting picked, right? Got it, but he's able to get that velocity, but he gets it up and down. That's a key. I love the timing here of this throw.
Look at how he buys more time here with this little bound right here. Just because the receiver's just a little slow out of his break, but he's wide open.
Yep.
It's little things. And he's just got a maturity to his game. And like you said, huge jump sophomore to junior year, which is what you should see, by the way. Like that should be where it starts to click for most of these guys. Good eval, honestly, to push for Pitt. I mean, when he committed, I remember looking at his offer list like, man, this kid should have had more. But good on them for getting on.
Yeah.
They've done a pretty good job at that position.
But that's going to happen in years like this, John. There's just so many quarterbacks that it's kind of like some guys are going to get missed, especially a kid like him. Like you said, this is another off-platform play that I love. Steps in the pot, protect the ball better. That's a criticism I have. Come on, man, don't let that ball get out there like that. But you're going to miss kids in a class this deep. I mean, John, you and I have talked about it a million times. Ryan and I have talked about it a million times. This is one of the deepest quarterback classes I've ever seen. I mean, and it's not just deep with 5 stars. It's deep. It's deep, period. There's I've seen 25, 30 kids, and I'm like, that kid's a Power 5 starter, like, and a good player. You know, not all are Notre Dame level and Ohio State and Alabama level, but guys are like, man, if boy, there. I think Vanderbilt? I saw some school that's got a kid. I'm like, man, that kid's a pretty good football player. Austin Novosad just goes under the radar to Baylor. Kenny Minchey goes to Pitt, and I'm looking at these kids can play. Look at the touch there. We're talking about all this velocity, but look at this one. This is exactly the opposite. This is touch right here, timing and touch, and that's what he shows. That's a kid that's got a really high football IQ.
Brian, I know you said that this is Golden Tate's former high school. What's the level here? Because I'm really just overly impressed about just how mechanically sound he is for a high schooler.
I don't know what it's like now. When Golden played there, it was one of the worst I've ever seen.
Gotcha.
They have upped their schedule now, like they're playing better teams now. But when Golden played there, it was pretty terrible.
It's still mid-level. I mean, some of those schools, the school that ironically is the Irish on some of these highlights, that's Knoxville Catholic. They've had guys for a long time.
Home of Harrison. Yeah, they had a guy named Harrison Smith from there. He turned out to be pretty decent.
He was not bad. Not bad.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about, like, you talked about the depth of this class, Brian, Tennessee, the state of Tennessee's got like 4 bona fide Power 5 guys, and none of them were really ever considering Tennessee. I think that slowed down the process for some of these guys. They go out and get Nico, and then like Marcel Reed, who's going to Ole Miss, is there. Brock Glenn is still available there. He's become a huge recruit. Kenny Minchey, Chris Parson. These guys are all in Tennessee, and the Vols weren't like pressing early when they were juniors for any of them, which is a red flag to a lot of other programs sometimes.
I'm going to say something about that when we're done, John, but I wanted to point out this play. This may not seem like much to y'all, but when I watch this throw, he's purposely throwing the ball where he threw it. And this is one of those this is a smart quarterback, because if he throws this ball where the running back is or the receiver is, it's a lateral. But he throws it where he wants the receiver to go to. And you can see that's where he's trying to throw it. You can see where his shoulders are. His feet are not there, but you can see where he's throwing it. He's trying to throw the ball right there. And he makes the receiver get downhill where it's not a lateral. It may not seem like a big play to you, but to me, as a quarterback evaluator, I see something like that. I'm like, that's a smart football player. That's a kid that understands the game and he just sees it that way. And I absolutely love that.
Same thing right there. Sam Backer blitz. He didn't even try to set his feet. He knew the slant would be there.
Yep. Leads them. And again, here's you see, like, look, he can move the chains if you need him to. He's not a kid you're going to be designing a bunch of runs for. He's a pocket passer.
Yep.
He's not Tyler Buckner. He's not Everett Golson. He's not Malik. He's not Ian Book. He's just he's a pocket passer that can move the chains if you give him a crease, but he's not going to be a kid that's going to be going out there making a bunch of plays.
Little Dak Prescott, maybe?
Yeah. Not as athletic, but yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's just, although Dak was a pretty good runner in college, but what Dak is now.
He's still a pretty good runner with Dallas when they need him to be.
This is one thing I do not like. He lets this ball get away from his body way too much. Way too much. He's got to protect that ball better.
He's a playmaker, Brian.
That's fine. You can make it. You just want to make sure that the plays you're making are for your team. That's something I do like about Novosad is when he steps into the pocket, he does that dip and rip, where he gets that ball tucked and held. That's something that's very important. That ball literally in the middle of 5 guys. This is one of those throws that you're like, remember that scene from Major League? Nice catch, Hayes. Don't ever effing do it again. Like that. That's exactly what this throw is, but he makes it, He makes play.
Have you ever seen there's a Mike Holmgren clip of Brett Favre making a ridiculous throw like that, and he's just kind of like, don't. Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
Nice throw, Brad.
I guarantee you, if they had the NFL films on the sideline all the time, Dan Reeves probably said that about 1 million times of throws John Elway made, and I'm sure Mike Holmgren's got about 1 million of those of Brett Favre. There's no doubt. So, guys, that is Kenny Minchey on film, and I think you all see it. That's one of the more live arms you're going to find. And I'm going to be honest with you. I think Tennessee is going to regret the decision that they made, in my opinion. They went for the guy that's got the elite physical tools, and they passed up other kids who were just, in my opinion, better football players. And John, you know my Nico stance. We'll see if I'm right or wrong about that. I actually hope I'm wrong because he seems like a decent kid. You know, I mean, he seems like a nice kid. I have nothing personal against him, but I just don't see what everybody else sees. And as you said, you've got to be able to lock down your home state if you're Tennessee. And the sign that hey, you're going to go, not only are you going to pass on the kids from our state, you're going to pass on some pretty good players, and you're going to go buy a kid from California. You know, I'm very curious how that's perceived by the folks in Tennessee. If it matters at all, maybe it doesn't matter, but I'm very curious how that's going to turn out. But I think they're going to end up regretting that, in my opinion, because like you said, there's some good football players in the state of Tennessee. Like,
and there's so much more pressure on Nico now. Yeah. It's like if he's not the guy, because Hendon Hooker's gone, right? After this year, does he have to be the guy day one? If you brought in one of these in-state guys, you push a battle, maybe you bring in a grad transfer, you go kind of traditional with it, and there's lower expectations. But going to LA and to get what should be the most polarizing quarterback. Arch is because of his name, but
apparently, John, if his name wasn't Arch Manning, he'd be a borderline 2-star, according to the former head of recruiting at Rivals.
Yeah, former head. Got it.
Yeah,
yes. It's not quite that drastic. I mean, when you're built like Andrew Luck, and you're a 4-year starter at that school with those traits, I think you're going to be okay. But borderline 2-star is really, really hard to digest there. But Nico's the most polarizing, is my point. So if it doesn't work, we're going to know soon.
Right.
And that's really – it's Jared Guarantano all over again there, where they just had to kind of force it, and it never worked. But it's on a higher scale. So like you said,
because the money.
Because
of the money.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And the same thing with Jaden Rashada. I mean, there's going to be so much more pressure on Jaden Rashada now because of the and we don't even know if it's true that I've been told he didn't get close to that much money. He got money, but it wasn't like, you know, the money that his agent or whoever's throwing around out there. You know what I mean? And other people are throwing around. Like,
that was so crazy. He was so off.
The 9.5 mil or whatever it was
because of that. Like the first day he was shell shocked because like he committed, and that day all those reports came out, and then like 2 days later he's throwing in front of, you know, Trent Dilfer, all these guys, and man, he looked awful, and he'll tell you that he looked as bad as we've ever seen him.
That's pressure 17-year-olds should not have thrust on them, in my opinion.
And then he got outthrown by his fellow Miami commitment the rest of the way, Emory Williams, who was another one of these that I think schools are going to make some phone calls about because he's profiled as QB2 for them. So it's going to be quite interesting. A lot of flips are going down. I wrote about that this morning. Shameless plug at SI.
You
There's going to be a lot
more
flips. There's only been 5. There's going to be about 5 more.
Oh, yeah. Now, when I did have a question for you on that. Do you count a flip as someone who decommits and then later, like, do you count Eli Holstein as a flip, or is that just a decommitment and then chose another school? How do you classify that?
If it's relatively close, it feels like a flip. And I think that was maybe, a month or something like that. I mean, if it's relatively close, it feels like a flip. But if it's like, 6 months later or something like that, it's certainly not one of those. But yeah, that one, I tell you what, Saban considers it a flip. That's for sure.
Especially who they flip them from.
I don't think A&M gotten a commitment since like all that went down. It's really
not anybody good. Not from anybody that's but I also think too they put the spotlight on themselves too with the whole we're not buying players thing. It's like, well, okay, you got all eyes on you now.
Why double down? Why double down when you don't have to?
Well, then what was the video that came out recently of the guy saying, "Hey, those people up there are gonna, they're gonna get paid if you come here." It's like,
just a lot. It's just this whole year has been like that. It's just amazing to watch, honestly.
Let's talk about these two kids and just kind of where things stand. So to me, honestly, guys, people say, I like this guy better. I like that guy better. My stance is if you get one of these two kids in Notre Dame, you're set. You're good at quarterback in 2023. And I'm not saying they're going to get either. They may not get either. I think these are the two kids. We had heard about Brock Glenn. The thing, I don't see Notre Dame really pushing for that one, John. And my thing is, I think that right now Notre Dame is one of many schools that like Brock Glenn and they love the arm. But they're gonna focus more on the kids maybe that have the higher floors, and I think that's the thing is Brock Glenn is one of the, along with Nico in my opinion, and I would say Nico has a higher ceiling certainly. They are the two with the most dramatic floor to ceiling ratios in this class. I think Jaden Rashada fits into that mold a little bit, although Jaden's different. I think Jade just needs to be coached. I think the tools are there. I just think he hasn't gotten to coaching. Like you'd mentioned, like maybe it was Ryan said, like when you watch Kenny Minchey, like this kid's been coached how to play quarterback. If Jaden Rashada had the same quarterback coaching, we'd be talking about him a little bit differently. John, you know how high I am on Jaden Rashada's talent. He's just going to need more time because he's got to get coached. But the tools are there. But Brock Glenn is one of those interesting guys, John. And we're not going to dive into the film. I just want to give you a chance, you and Ryan a chance to speak on him because he is on their radar.
Mm-hmm.
I personally would go for the other two kids because I do think the floor is important in this quarterback class. And Brock's got a lot of arm talent, and he's without question the best athlete of the three that we've talked about.
Agree.
It's just the feel for the game and some of the other things just aren't where some of these other quarterbacks are. But you've seen him up in personal twice now, right? You've seen him twice. Then you see him at Tennessee and in Lee Levin. So what are your thoughts on him?
Camps we saw Minchey, yep.
Okay, what are your thoughts on Brock Glenn as a player and a prospect?
I'm right with you. On 5 given throws, he'll look like the best kid out there over a stretched period of time. It'll fluctuate a little bit more, and then you go back to his junior year stuff. Not a very pass-heavy program, So you kind of understand where he is more of a flash than a consistent, productive quarterback like Novosad, like Kenny Minchey. So I do think that's part of I guess the issue there. There's some baseball in his background, so you do get a little bit more variance in where he can deliver the ball from, which is a good and a bad thing, right? I mean, it's bad from a consistency standpoint, but when you do need to go off script, I think he's a little bit more equipped for it. Certainly needs time before he heads to the next level, before he sees the field. And the other thing that with Notre Dame that I think is smart of the 3 to go for the other 2, still a lot of contenders, man. That kid, he kind of has no idea right now. Every time you make a phone call, I had one this morning about him. It's another school that feels better about their chances. And he says he's still considering 5. It's just such a big number this late in the game. So he could well end up at Florida State replacing Chris Parson before all is said and done. And 2 weeks ago, I would have said there's no chance. It's either Auburn or Ohio State. So I think there's different pressures at those programs. I think that could be a turnoff for Auburn, which is his first name, by the way. So he's really interesting. I do.
His first name's actually Auburn.
His name is Auburn Brock Glenn. Yes.
Okay.
So, wow. If that's a miss, which it looks like it's about to be, because Auburn just got in contact with Jackson Smolik, who was the Iowa kid who replaced Nico at the Elite 11 and had a really nice run. He's from Iowa. Had never heard of him before the event. He had a really nice run, and he's getting like Penn State's talked to him, LSU, Auburn now, Virginia Tech. All these schools are getting in on him. Anyway, my point
that's a sign when a school's fading away. When they start reaching out to other kids, that's a sign that they're not confident that they're going to get a guy.
Yeah, I think Glenn's going to end up at Florida State or Ohio State, where it's so different there. At FSU, he's going to be expected, kind of like Nico, pretty early on. Hey, you better be the right guy if that staff survives. And then at Ohio State, total development, long-term kind of deal, which I think is what's best for him.
Thank you for saying that, because for most of these quarterbacks, picking Ohio State in 23 is stupid, because you've got Devin Brown ahead of you, you've got Kyle McCord ahead of you. But to me, Brock Glenn is the one that if I'm Ohio State, that's the kid I think would be a great fit for him and them, because number one, his physical tools, if he reaches his ceiling, he can compete with all those quarterbacks physically, talent-wise. But there's not the demand for him to go in and play right now. And so that's why I think Notre Dame would actually be a good fit for him as well, because of Tyler Buckner. But I don't think that's the direction Notre Dame is going. But there aren't many kids, like I'd say, like Austin Novosad, I'm like, dude, do not go to Ohio State, right? Because you're just, if everybody pans out,
Raiola's coming in 24.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so with Glenn, though, like he is physically gifted enough to where, if you miss on him, if he doesn't pan out your house, you're okay. But if he pans out, he does have the physical tools to be a guy that can battle with. And I graded Kyle McCord out as a top 50 player coming out. I'm not nearly as high on Devin Brown, and neither is SI All-American, as like on 3 ranked him as the number 1 player in the country. I mean, he's a good player, but if Brock Glenn maxes his ability and Devin Brown maxes his ability, it's not close to me. It's not even close. And so that is something not many kids I would say, hey, Ohio State might actually make sense for you right now at quarterback. But because, like you said, he's going to need time. And what's the one school you can guarantee he's going to get time? It's Ohio State. Because once CJ Stroud's a top 3 pick this year, Kyle McCord's going to step into this equation. And we're going to talk about him being a first-round pick in a year or two. So I think that would actually be a great – of the movies looking at, I think might be the best for him as far as he needs time. He's going to need time, and I don't think he's going to get it at Florida State, to your point. And I don't even know if he gets it at Auburn either, to be honest with you. Yeah, so that's going to be an interesting
one. That's a mess to be.
Auburn's quarterback room is a dumpster fire right now, man.
To be light, yeah, that's a mess. Yeah. 3 transfers. They haven't named a starter. So once you do, at least one or both are gone, and then it's one freshman after that. I mean, it is interesting to say the least. Yeah.
John, I wanted to bring this up because this was asked, and I know you've seen this young man in person at least once or twice as well. And that is, you brought up Chris Parson, who's currently committed to Florida State, but it looks like that's not going to stick. Correct? Am I correct in that? What I've read.
A lot of schools talking. SMU got him on campus. Mississippi State, Virginia Tech offered today. He's talked to Mike Vick recently. It's looking like he's going to end up elsewhere.
Here's a question I had first, and then I want to get into your evaluation. Is Florida State, their movement with other quarterbacks, more about Chris Parson looking around, or is Chris Parson looking around because Florida State's looking at other quarterbacks? Or is it
I think it's the latter. They offered Brock Glenn and Ricky Collins like the same week. And then the following weekend, Parson shows up at like Mississippi State hanging out with Mike Leach. He's like, okay,
good on him. Yeah, good on him.
So good on him. I think that was – they want to take 2 quarterbacks. So obviously they were going to offer a couple others. And then, Parson said that they've been transparent and he's been transparent. He took the official to FSU at the end of June and said he was glad he went and he got more clarity on things. But he's a smart kid. He's been a starter since his freshman year of high school. So he understands how to operate. So I do think it's a little bit more behind the scenes. But, yeah, I think the chances of him ending up at FSU are lower today than even a month ago. Because I do think Glenn is in play for them, and they may end up with another QB2 type down the line. But I don't know if the timing of how they operated it helped at all with Parson. So I do think he will be available. And other schools, I'm told, are beginning to establish with him. So I think a lot of schools see him as very flippable. Because like you said with Notre Dame, it's one thing to just offer a bunch of quarterbacks that are committed, but you need to be realistic. Like, who do you legitimately have a shot at potentially flipping? And for some reason, other schools are feeling like he's out there potentially for the take. And I've heard a couple Big Ten schools are about to rendezvous with him next. So, yeah, I think he's definitely available behind the scenes, I should say.
Talk to me. I've only seen film. I haven't seen Chris Parsons' summer workouts. I've only seen high school film. I like him, but I'm also biased. Ryan will tell you. We were asked a question the other day, who's your favorite non-Notre Dame player? And Woody Dancer. I loved Woody Dancer's player. I'm big. Like, there's just some about. First of all, I'm biased towards 6-foot quarterbacks. It's just me, maybe. But I like those guys that are just the street ballers. Like, I love those kids, and that's what Chris Parson is to me. I mean, he's just it's going to look pretty. He's going to complete 55% of his passes in a game, but then you're just like, the kid goes out. I think the most recent comparison to me is Taj Boyd. When I see him, I think Taj Boyd, and maybe a little bit more street ball than Taj Boyd was, but very similar. And Taj Boyd is. People talk about Deshaun Watson launched Clemson. No, Taj set Clemson up for Deshaun to take him to the next level. I see a lot of that in Chris Parson. That's me. John, what have you seen from him? What are your thoughts on him as a player? Because, again, it's someone who, as Notre Dame's looking to maybe get involved with some guys that are open, maybe he is a guy that they turn to if they can't, get things going with these other 2 kids.
Yeah, I think he's first of all, he's built really well. We talked about Kenny Minchey's frame. Chris's frame is pretty much where you want it at the high school level as a junior going into his senior season. Really filled out, well proportioned, and it shows when he launches the ball. He needs to utilize a little bit more of that lower half to deliver it to the third level, but he's done so consistently for a long time. Like I said, he was a freshman year starter in the state of Texas, and he went to a state championship. So there's a lot of experience to him. Like you said, Brian, The off-script stuff is great. The footwork, the athleticism shows up every time you see him, and I think that makes him so intriguing. I don't think he's one you're going to design 10 runs for in a game, but he can definitely get you out of a jam if need be. There's a lot of flash plays to his name. And then I think in terms of his arm, good, not the best, not the livest, but the motion is clean. Another over-the-top type of delivery, closer to three-quarter compared to Minchey. So I like that about his game as well. But he's also among, I would say, all the quarterbacks at the Elite 11, biggest chip on his shoulder, most competitive, just that edge. He's got that edge to his game. And I think maybe out there, part of it was the whole FSU thing. Hey, people are thinking that maybe FSU's moving on from me. Let me show them, how dumb they are. If that's what it was, I don't know. He certainly didn't say that when we put a microphone in his face. But when he was out there, you could just kind of feel it. There was something at stake for him, and I like that. I like
the 6 foot is part of that as well. I'm just telling you right now, that's part of it as well.
To put himself out to that degree. So he's a kid I would bet on at the college level. If I'm a program looking for a later addition, he's one that I would give the benefit of the doubt to. And I think, again, a lot of programs are starting to look at him as one of the more viable options among those that are potentially open.
For me, Ryan, have you had a chance to watch Chris Parson at all? Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say yes. He was actually a player that I wanted to put on the table as a guy that Notre Dame should look at it.
Because that's part of what we're going to do too, is some guys to look at. Ryan, give me, because I'll just say kind of my thing is I like him a lot as a player. I don't know if I love the Notre Dame fit because of what Notre Dame is looking for is more of a pocket guy. Sure. And I feel like but at the same time, we've seen that they've been able to adjust their offense to Tyler Buchner as well.
Sure.
And so if he's a kid that you can look at, I'd look at him because, again, he's a playmaker. Ryan, when you've had a chance to look at him, what are your thoughts on Chris Parson?
He's a guy for me, John, kind of going off of you a little bit. He's like, as a defensive player, I'm like, we got him. We don't have him anymore. Right. Like, he's one of those dudes, like he's a frustrating guy for a defensive coordinator because the play's never dead, like the play is still going to go. And all those athletic traits are fantastic, man. Like, he can get you out of the jam. Like you said, again, not a guy that you're going to run, quarterback power with a ton. Like, you can do it in spurts, no doubt about it. Like, he's got enough athleticism in that regard, but he's one of those freelancers that, like, just extending as a passer, he's a very frustrating player to look at. So, Brian, to your point, like, yes, I don't think that he's in Tommy Rees's system where you're talking about timing, getting the ball out and going through progressions. He might not be the perfect fit, but there's something to work with, man. Mm-hmm. He's got a lot of tools to really like as a just improviser.
He's on my list of guys to look at if you're Notre Dame. I mean, he is to me. And again, I don't know if he'd be the first call that I would make. If I'm recruiting for Tommy Rees's offense, he's not the first call I make. If he's being recruited for Brian Driscoll's offense, I'd probably call him a little bit sooner. But again, that's the thing about quarterback recruiting. It's not always, well, this is the best quarterback in the country. This is the guy that's best fits what we're trying to do. And that's something that has to be considered too. And, we've talked about Nico a lot, John, and my stance on that. But I did say this. I hate why he picked Tennessee. But if I were to design what would be the school where I think he has the best chance of success, it is Tennessee. Because when I look at what the coach Josh Heupel was able to do with Hendon Hooker, and they're very similar. Now, Nico has much better physical arm strength, but raw player. I liked Hendon. Hendon's a winner. I mean, you just watch him at Virginia Tech, and I don't know what Justin Fuente was thinking. He kept trotting out quarterbacks over top of him. I'm like, that guy's not nearly as good as Hendon Hooker. And for some reason, you always win. You always freaking win. Whenever you put Hendon Hooker in a game, you always win. Guess what? He did the same thing in Tennessee, right? But if you can develop that, then I look at a kid like Nico and say that's probably the quarterback coach who's developed guys like him the best, in my opinion. And so I do think that's a good fit in that regard as well, because you gotta find a fit for you, right? It's not just about here's the best player; it's who's the best fit for what we're trying to get in this class of quarterback, and that's partly why I think Austin Novosad and Kenny Minchey were the top two choices. There's a lot of guys that we're going to talk about who Notre Dame could go after, but what is Notre Dame looking for? A guy that can sit back and shred you with his arm, which means you got to have the physical talent, but also just as important, if not more so, do you have the mind to come in and compete and do what we're looking to do and get the ball out to the guys we need to get it out? And do you have some guts? I think that's something Notre Dame's definitely looking for in this class. Dante was that way, right? Chris Vazine is that way a little bit. Jackson Arnold has some of that in him. And the two kids they're recruiting now, Kenny Minchey and Austin Novosad, definitely have that in them. They've got some guts as quarterbacks. And I think you need that to thrive at a place like Notre Dame. It's a must. It's a must. I don't know what you guys think about that part of it, but that's kind of my thoughts. So, Ryan, you talked about John, there's some other guys. As you've kind of gone and you've seen a lot of these kids in quarterback, and we'll ask you this, John, and then we'll let you go, and Ryan and I will dive into some more of this, and then we'll dive into the Q&A. But if you were kind of advising Notre Dame, so I'm Tommy Reese, I call you up, hey John, obviously we're going after Minchey, we're going after Novosad. Here's some guys we like. Tell me some players that you think we should go after that could be committed somewhere else, but maybe might be flippable for us, or some uncommitted kids that you think have ceilings that could be kids that come here. And we're not looking for just a depth piece. We're looking for a kid to come in and compete. Who would be some names that you would throw out to Notre Dame that again, they might actually have a shot at? It's not like, okay, Arch, Malachi, you know what I mean? Like,
just go get those guys. No big deal.
Right. So what are some guys that you would say you would advise for them to take a look at?
I will say there is a top 5-ish quarterback, I'm not allowed to name him, who is more available than people think. And supposedly something could happen there soon, but apparently one of the big name guys, not Arch, one of the big name guys is more available than people think. So there could be a lot of shuffle here going on. But yeah, I think the two guys they've targeted are certainly two of my favorites. I think Emory Williams was kind of the surprise. You can't get J.J. Cole because of his dad and all that stuff. He would probably be the most obvious to try to target. But I think Emory Williams is worth talking about more. Out through Jaden Rashada, a kid who got better every single day at the event. And he won our accuracy gauntlet on the final day, him and Malachi Singleton, who's another worth calling, although I love the floor. I don't know about the ceiling for him. I think he is one you can absolutely draw up.
Where's he committed to?
I just don't know schematically how he fits.
Where's he committed to, John? Malachi.
He's committed to Arkansas to be KJ Jefferson 2.0.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's one I would be curious about if you just want someone, like you said, who can compete right now. Schematically, though, not sure he's the best fit. I think Emory Williams, 6'4", 205 pounds or so, really good athlete. I think he's one that I would be really curious about. And he's saying all the right things about Miami. I mean, he just committed like 2 weeks ago, but obviously Rashada committed after that. And that creates a connotation around it. So I do think he could be one that gets more phone calls. I already know he's gotten some phone calls. He's one that I think is kind of a sneaky contender to play sooner rather than later if he goes to the right situation. I don't know if Miami is that situation today, but he's just one that surprised and then just kind of maintained that. Usually if there's a guy who takes you off guard, it's for a throw, it's for a day or maybe an hour. He sustained it throughout the entire event. And you go back and watch the tape, and there's some fun stuff on there playing out in the panhandle where there's like no exposure, no coverage. So I think he's kind of a nice diamond in the rough, who's a good athlete at 6'4", which is not something that we see a whole lot of availability around this time of year. So I think he's one that I at least try to make some calls on. But yeah, I think Notre Dame's on the right track though. I think Parson would be third on that list behind Novosad and Minchey. Minchey's, I don't know how flippable he is. Like you said, he said
it would take the right school.
Yeah,
in my opinion. I
asked him just because we were there. I'm like, hey, is anyone calling? And he's like, no. He's like, I'm going to Pitt. I'm done. Obviously, Notre Dame wasn't calling at that point. So I know that could change a lot of things. I didn't envision Novosad considering another program. Yeah. After what he said about Georgia and some of these other schools, I was like, oh, you're done. You're looking at these three, and that's kind of it. But obviously, Notre Dame changed his mind. So I do think that was interesting. The Smollett kid who's kind of blowing up a little bit, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he's at that level.
Yeah,
certainly a nice story, a nice run. But I'm not sure athletically how well he can compete at the highest level. And I take another look at Avery Johnson. I know he just committed to K-State. He is so athletic, so dynamic with the ball in his hands, and he just needs to put it together as a passer. So I don't know if you're not trying to make it a long-term thing. I don't know if he's the right fit. But man, you can mask a whole lot of that early on, similarly to Tyler Buckner. Where you have so much to work with there.
I think with Avery, he would be the exception to my I don't want a guy like that in this class, because if Avery can't play quarterback, he can play something else. He's one of the few kids in this class at quarterback that's like, look, if it just doesn't work for him as a quarterback, let's say he can't read a defense or something, okay, go catch passes, because that kid is a legitimate Power 5 athlete. Forget just the quarterback aspect of it. He's a legitimate Power 5 athlete.
He's
and like I've said this, right? Like
move.
Tyler Buckner's a great athlete for a quarterback, but like I'm not putting Tyler Buckner at X, right? I mean, like he's a really good athlete for a quarterback, and he can run as a quarterback, but he's not gonna move to tailback and become a 1,500-yard runner, right? Avery Johnson can legitimately, to me, go play another position at the Power 5 level. It would take some learning, but he's got a lot of the kid from West Virginia that committed to USC is like a third grader to play quarterback. David Sills, right? Obviously not a third grader. Slight exaggeration to prove a
seventh grader, whatever.
well, by today's terms, that's what it would be, right? Because when he got offered as an eighth grader, it's like, what the? You barely offered juniors back then. Now it's like you're getting seventh and eighth graders legit. Go ahead.
Was it Kiffin who did that? Who did that?
Yeah, Kiffin.
It was Kiffin. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Now it makes sense.
But where he was able to, it didn't work a quarterback. He wasn't a quarterback by the time he got to college. But the point is, he was offered as a quarterback in the eighth grade, ended up not developing as a quarterback to that degree, and then all of a sudden becomes an all Big 12 caliber wide receiver. And that's what I see from Avery Johnson. So I would kick the tires there. I'm just not sure that Avery, I'm not sure how open he would be to that, because Notre Dame did pursue him early and then just passed because they went on Dante. So that's why I think where Notre Dame's going to have a hard time with flipping guys is the guys that they legitimately recruited early that they passed on. So Jackson Arnold, Chris Vezina, Avery Johnson would be one where they had early offers. They went after them early on, and then when they settled on Dante, they kind of said, hey, thanks, but no thanks. You're going to have a much harder time flipping that kid than a kid like Kenny Minchey, who you never really pursued to begin with, or a guy like an Austin Novosad, who's not really a guy that you recruited to begin with, and a lot of other people are just now getting on the board. And I think that would make – that's why people say, why aren't you talking about Jackson Arnold and Chris Vezina? It's because you don't often see kids get turned down by a school when they're top 100 players to then go back to that school, and that school misses out on the guy they passed on you for. It's just not overly realistic. Doesn't mean you don't make the phone call, but it
yeah, and they both found great fits too for them. So it's that's tough in and of itself. Good point.
Jackson Arnold does fit Jeff Lebby's offense pretty good, I think.
It's a great fit. It's a great fit.
And same with Vezina, because Vezina, to me he's a pocket passer that can run, and that's really what Clemson's always been best at, with the exception, in the last few years. Like, find that pocket passer that can run. DJ just can't run. Like, that was the stupidest thing when they're trying to call designed runs for him. Did you watch the Georgia game last year, Ryan? When they're calling power. Like Q power with I'm like, what are you doing?
And like big moments too, like 3rd and 2, and like
I'm like, you're literally just like it's like if you would have told me before the year that Tony Elliott just went and found his 2015 offense and was like, yeah, we're going to run that this year. Like, that's what they were doing with him at quarterback. It was the dumbest thing ever. Like, you don't have a slot receiver.
Yeah, Tony Elliott somehow was not a great offensive coordinator over the last couple of years, and is now the head coach of the University of Virginia. Makes a ton of sense.
He just flipped a good one from down here in Florida. Anthony Calandrea, that kid can sling it. Middle Tennessee commit before UVA got involved. So he can still recruit. There's no doubt about
Sometimes, guys, I've said this about Bama, Ryan. The sum sometimes is greater than the individual parts.
Sure.
And I've always felt that about Tony Elliott and Jeff Scott. I never thought either one of them necessarily individually were great coaches, but together they were a great duo. I think they played off each other's strengths and weaknesses very well, and neither has been the same since Jeff Scott got that South Florida job. They just haven't. We'll see what kind of head coach he is, but their offense the last couple of years is, I mean, if it wasn't for Trevor, and this is why we predicted their drop off last year. Like you watch the film of them in 2019 and 2020, that was a different football team. And they were basically, if you don't have number 16 at quarterback, you're not a playoff team in 19 and 20. You're just not. And Ohio State showed that. I mean, it was 16-0, and Ohio State was clearly the better team until 16 was like, I got this. You know what I mean? Like
Trevor Lawrence masked a lot of
it did. And I mean, and you had ETN, you know, who helped with that. But yes, Trevor Lawrence masked a lot of flaws in that program that got exposed last year. And that's partly why I like Cade Klubnik as the future there, because he is a bit of that pocket passer, gunslinger that, you know, you can do some different things with. And I think he's going to fit in very, very well. And I think Chris Vizina fits that offense a lot better too, where DJ is, to me, an old school. I mean, honestly, if you're talking about best fits, if DJ was going to go to the school, hey, where do you fit best? He needs to go to like Iowa or Wisconsin.
I'm going to say Michigan.
Similar thing, Michigan, right? Where what does Jim Harbaugh traditionally want to do? He wants to get up under center, wants to run play action pass, you know, have a traditional type of offense. That's the kind of place where I think DJ would fit in much better than a place that's asking him to make quick decisions and, you know, get the ball out quickly and all that other kind of stuff. That's just not who he is. And then you're definitely not going to put him on, you know, running Q power with him. That's just bad coaching. You know, just like maybe it was element of surprise. I thought maybe they're just trying to do an element of surprise against Georgia.
No.
They just kept doing it all year. You're like, yeah, this is dumb. This is dumb.
Can't run Ryan Mallett up the middle.
No,
Ryan Mallett.
That's a great.
I haven't heard that name in a long time.
That's a great analogy, but that's a great point. I mean,
that's
the kind of athlete DJ is, right? Like, I mean, he's a great baseball player. He was a pitcher. Like, he wasn't exactly like a shortstop. Right. He was a pitcher.
Right.
So,
that if they lose a couple early, that could be a thing.
Don't be shocked. Yeah, don't be shocked. I don't know if they're going to lose a couple early with the schedule they have, but you know, at least they try. I give Clemson credit.
Maybe if they struggle offensively early, but they're still winning, they would consider it. I mean, never know.
Dabo pulled Kelly Bryant when they were winning. You know, they were not losing. Of course, you had Trevor there, but he's done it before, so we'll see. But
well, and Cade Klubnik isn't Trevor. Go ahead, John.
Appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, of course, buddy. We always love having you on. So I'm glad you finally are home. I know John had to get home, and he was like, you know, what does my house look like again this summer? After this summer, like every time I'm calling him, he's either at an event or at the airport or on his way to the airport or just got to the hotel from his airport. So I was like, okay, must be nice to get home. I had a feeling you just moved. That's what I was like. I think the shelf is empty. So. We appreciate you, John.
Imagination out here.
Yeah, so. We appreciate you. We'll talk to you again here very, very soon. So
be good.
See you, John.
Appreciate it.
Yep, take care. So that's John Garcia. I always love having John on the show. He does a great job. So Ryan, some other guys that you've been able to kind of go through and look at and see kind of guys maybe you think Notre Dame should kind of go after.
Yeah, I mean, it's a couple players that we've already talked about kind of throughout the podcast so far, but I was going to mention Avery Johnson, which John just mentioned. I think it's a little different. He's a little lower rated than like a Vizina and an Arnold, so maybe it'll be a slightly easier to get back in the conversation. I would at least make the phone call, though, because I think he has familiarity with the staff. He's a guy that you have known previously, and I think that you can paint it away where maybe you could get back in the conversation. So I would make the phone call. That's just pretty much it. We mentioned Ricky Collins, a guy that I like. You know, he's a player committed to Purdue, and he's obviously not afraid to go up to Indiana, right? I mean, to start out with, and he's a talented kid. I think he fits into Tommy Rees's system pretty well, you know, because he's a pretty traditional type of player, has enough athleticism to win outside the pocket, but I mean, he's going to work in rhythm most of the time, and I think that he's worth the call. I also had Chris Parson down, which I kind of talked about a little bit earlier. He's a little more of the freelancer type. I also wrote down Pierce Clarkson, who's out of St. John Bosco, who's another kid who's kind of the same, like he's a little bit of a freelancer, works more in structure because he's playing at St. John Bosco, so it's a little bit better of a program, better offensive line in front of him, right? So that's a few of the guys. And I wrote down Braden Dorman from Arizona as a kid that I kind of like a little bit.
Notre Dame looked at him early on as well. He actually camped at Notre Dame last summer.
He's got a nice frame. Obviously, he's 6'4", 205. He's kind of that traditional pocket passer. You want a guy that's more Jack Conish, like that's kind of him for me, right? But like accurate, tall, decently strong arm. I kind of like him, and he's committed to Arizona. Obviously, pertinence.
He's
as
a
far as
redhead,
proximity.
so he's got to have some Irish blood in him.
100%. And I mean, hey, if you're Notre Dame and you can't talk to a kid and potentially get him from Arizona, then it's a little bit of issue, right? I know it's a proximity thing.
We have a much bigger problem on hand. Yeah. And he's a kid that I think the staff liked. I mean, there's another kid that they looked at. I don't know if you had a chance to watch him, probably not flippable, but like Tad Hudson's a kid that they looked at early on too. Kid from North Carolina, really big armed kid,
Gotcha.
Kind of raw, but that's the thing. There's just so many guys like that in this class, right? There's a lot of good football players in this class.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really is. Cause I mean, I think Brand just put in the chat, for instance, it's like, maybe Pierce Clarkson isn't a flippable player from Louisville. The point is that there's a lot of options. Like you make the call, right? And like you see what's going on. I mean, I just talked to every player that I just mentioned is currently committed to a university, because outside of your Austin Novosads of the world, there's not a lot of guys that are uncommitted right now, right? Like you're going to have to flip someone in theory. I mean, the board is kind of, I don't want to say dried up, because that's like, I don't like how that sounds.
There's not a lot of Brock Glenns out there that are just flat out uncommitted
100%.
Players.
100%. Yep. The board has kind of righted itself. Like Dante committed and the board was kind of already filled out for the most part. So there's not a ton of uncommitted guys. So we're going to spend most of our time talking about guys that will have to be flipped, because that's just kind of where you are in this process right now.
I think you're kind of right there. There are a ton of guys that are. I mean, look, Austin Novosad is committed to Baylor.
Yep.
I think he's more open to flipping, I think, than John thinks he is. Because I think we've learned in our quick conversation with Austin Novosad, he knows how to give the right answer on things.
Very political.
Yes. Very savvy young man. Savvy young man. Kenny Minchey's similar in that regard. I mean, you're going to have a lot of these kids that are committed to other schools that you're not going to know that they're looking until it happens. Right.
Sure.
And that's just like, I mean, there was started to be a little bit of rumblings, but like when Marcus Stokes flipped from Penn State to Florida, it just kind of happened. I mean, it's going to be something like that. So I think those are the guys that you look at and say, you look at him and say, hey, this is a kid that maybe you can get in with. So I think you got to work through the system, right? I mean, you've got to work through the system and say, hey, look, are you interested or not? And if a kid says, I'm not, if you get anything more than no, then you stay on a kid, right? Because I'm not sure. If he's not sure, that leaves open a window. And if you like the kid enough, you go after him.
If they take the call, keep making the calls, man. Like that's right. I mean, that comes down to. I would say this, Brian. I liked Kenny Minchey the first time I watched film on him a few days ago. Every time I watch him, man, he grows more and more on me. I like that kid. I like Austin Novosad too, but Minchey for me is just kind of like that. He's every time I've watched him, I've just liked him more and more. Like he's that guy for me.
Right. So that's kind of where they are at quarterback right now. I think this is going to evolve. I think that they're going to know pretty quickly just how interested the kids we've discussed are. And if they are legitimately interested, I think you'll see the focus be on them. If there's some hemming and hawing, then I think Notre Dame's going to be smart enough to know we've got to expand the board. And then when you're talking about a kid who is committed like Kenny Minchey, who's not necessarily looking to flip, his situation's a little bit different than, so people say, well, they must like Austin Novosad better because they offered him first. That's not always how it works. Austin Novosad's committed to Baylor, but he is in the process of potentially being flipped.
Sure.
And if you don't get involved now, you're going to be left out. He's not going to flip to A&M or Ohio State and then you flip him from there. He'd flip once if he flips, and then you got to make a run at it. Whereas Kenny Minchey's not really looking around. So as you're kind of going through the process of seeing who you like and who you're going to flip, you've got to get in the game with that kid now. It's a timing aspect of it. You know what I mean? And so you've got to get in the mix with Austin Novosad to have any chance. And then that allows you to kind of go through the process. I do think they like Austin Novosad a lot. I think they like Kenny Minchey a lot.
Yep.
And with Novosad, obviously, there's the benefit of he's really talented. He's really productive. I think he fits the Notre Dame system incredibly well. And the fact it does not hurt that he's from Texas and is friends with guys that he knows. Meaning, I guarantee you that part of the conversation that Notre Dame has had as they've evaluated this kid is going in and saying, hey, Braylon, what do you think of Austin?
Yep.
Hey, Jaden, what do you think of Austin? Now, again, Jaden's not committed to Notre Dame, but you have enough of a relationship with him where you trust what he's going to say. Plus, Jaden played with Cade Klubnik. And so you're not saying, oh, I think he's really good. You know if he's good or not. It's more of a, what does he communicate? Does he lead? Does he coach you up? Does he yell at you when you make a mistake? Does he pat you on the butt when you make a mistake? Is there, how is he in these settings as a young, as a leader, as a quarterback? Those are the things that you're asking about.
Sure.
And the fact that they have then continued to go in on Austin Novosad tells me that in these conversations, they've heard nothing but, oh, this guy's great leader, smart, and they've checked all those boxes, in my opinion, which is why I think he's kind of been a guy that you look at and say, hey, this is a guy that has what they're looking for. And so I think that's part of the process too. But the point is, you had to do that in a hurry because he's going to be off the market soon. Kenny Minchey technically is already off the market.
Sure.
And if you're going to flip him, it would be something that whether you offer him today or you offer him next week or in a month, it's not going to change his circumstance. Austin Novosad, you can't afford to wait. So that's part of this process too that people need to understand.
Yeah, no, I think there's windows for different commits, right? Like, I mean, John talked about it. He, in theory, Austin wanted to have this figured out in July, right? Like, if I'm going to flip, where am I going to? And then I just really want to shut it down. Like, I think that for the most part, he's a kid that wants to kind of figure it out for the season. Like, I don't think he wants to go into the season having to worry about A&M and Ohio State, and if I'm sticking with Baylor, like all that. Right. I mean, it's exhausting. Like, let's call it what it is. Like, it's very
distracting as well,
and also very distracting. Yep, yeah. Said very perfectly. And I think I love the layer that you put in there that we didn't talk about earlier in the show. He's a Texas guy, and it matters. It does matter. People are going to roll their eyes, but
explain that, Ryan, because what we're saying, we're not saying that. Well, he can't play and Notre Dame doesn't like him, but he's from Texas, so they're going to make a run at him. No, that's not what we're saying. But it is part of it. So please, I just want to make sure people understand what we mean by that. Because you're not taking a kid to help with recruiting and you don't think he can play. You're not using him that way. But it doesn't mean if all things are equal, that may not be the thing that maybe slides a kid in your favor, in my opinion.
Look, we've talked about this a lot on this show, right? The importance of getting back into Texas. I just wrote an article. Again, I've reiterated this before. Previous 5 cycles up to 2022, 3 players from the state of Texas in the 5 years, less than a recruiting cycle. If Notre Dame's able to close on Jaden Greathouse, which we'll hear his commitment on the 15th, whether he picks Notre Dame or not, and if they're also able to maybe flip an Austin Novosad, that's 5 players in 1 cycle. And I think that the law of averages are, hey, Texas puts out incredible products.
Right.
Few of those guys are going to hit. Like, there's going to be some guys that aren't going to hit. There's going to be some guys that are, but you're recruiting the best state for high school football players that continuously puts out top talent, and you are hitting a pipeline to get back into the state of Texas, which you have not had in 5 years. Had in a long time now at this point. You need to get back in the state of Texas, and I think Austin Novosad's another reason it's like, wow, they pulled out a top-ranked quarterback out of the state as well, on top of Braylon James and Micah Bell and Peyton Bowen and potentially Jaden Greathouse. I think that's a statement by the Notre Dame staff.
If I'm remembering this correctly, and I'm trying to go back and think through this, and I'm pulling up my sheet of commits as I'm going through this. Mm-hmm. But from 2016 to 2022 classes, I believe that Notre Dame signed a total. So I'm expanding the time frame a little bit further back than what you had it, right? So I'm not contradicting the intel Ryan just gave. I'm expanding it a little bit more.
Sure.
From 2016 to 2022. So that's what? 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. So that's 7 classes.
Yep.
Notre Dame signed 5 kids.
Yep, including Brock Wright and Avery Davis as you're popping back further.
But here's my point, right? So that's why I said I went back to 2016, added Brock and Avery. So that's how I get the 5 to add on to what Ryan said. Here's the point I'm going to make on that, though. You have a running back, a quarterback, 2 defensive linemen, and a tight end. Not as much skill is the point, right? Mm-hmm. The unique thing about what you just talked about is all 5 of those kids, if they get Jaden Greathouse, they're all skill players. And that's the key. It's fine. I mean, look, the problem is going to Texas and getting defensive lineman and tight ends is perfectly fine. Go for it. I mean, Notre Dame's gotten 2 NFL tight ends out of Texas in the last decade. Obviously, when you include Durham Smythe, who was drafted. If Brock Wright wasn't sitting behind Alize Mack and Cole Kmet his whole career, in Tommy Tremble, who were all high draft picks, he would have been drafted too. Let's be honest about that. Okay.
Yeah.
But the point is that's cool, but you can find those guys in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Illinois. And like what you can't find in traditional Notre Dame areas is guys like Braylon James, Jaden Greathouse, Micah Bell, the Peyton Bowen, that kind of really elite high upside guy at a skill position. And that's even more so than just because that would be 4, right? If they get Greathouse, that's 4, correct?
That's 4, yeah,
and,
currently.
And then Novosad, if just for the point we're trying to make, would be 5.
Yep.
You're talking about quarterbacks, receivers, and then last year getting a running back. That's truly where Texas could have the huge impact, is the positions where you need to get more dynamic athletically, that you can't find a ton of that in your traditional backyard. And that, to me, to your point, Ryan, is why Texas is so important. It's not just about getting a bunch of tight ends and D line and no line. Those are all fine. I mean, I'm not saying don't recruit those guys. I mean, go get Nigel Smith. Do it. It's just that on top of them, you have to get skill. And that's what's so unique about what they're doing in this class is they're getting dynamic playmakers out of the state. Think about this. Jaden Greathouse, who was an absolute dude on film last year, if Notre Dame gets him, will be significantly slower than anyone else that they're going to sign out of the state of Texas.
Brian, that's what I was going to add to this conversation is I literally just submitted an article to you of talking about the speed that Notre Dame is bringing in 2023. 3 of those guys out of Texas are included in that conversation. One is Micah Bell, who I would argue is one of the more athletic players in high school football, right? Like sub 21 in the 200, 10-4 in the 100, 24 plus in the long jump. Incredible athlete. Number 2 in that list, Peyton Bowen. I mean, he went to Notre Dame. What did he run? 4.38, right? 4.41, somewhere in that ballpark. Like
no, he ran a 4.38. The coaches didn't believe it. They made him run it again, and he ran a 4.41.
Sure.
So he's flipping fast.
You're talking about a kid that runs high 4.3s, low 4.4s, and a cornerback that I just talked about in Micah Bell that's even faster than him, right? That's 2.
A lot.
And then, yes. And when you talk about getting longer and more athletic, that has kind of been the onus from the staff. Braylon James is 6'3" with a 38-inch vertical and 4.47 in the 40-yard dash. Like those 3 players are not just good athletes, they're not just great athletes. Those are elite level athletes that you're getting out of this state. Just to reemphasize your point on, you're not just getting good football players. You're not just getting offensive linemen who are important. Obviously, I'm not dispelling the importance of line play. I'm a traditionalist in that sense. But the point is that you're going into the premier state for developing talent, and you're getting athletes. And your whole point of this recruitment, the big 2023 push, was what did we talk about all along? They want to get longer. They want to get more athletic. And 3 out of 4 of those guys, if Jaden Greathouse commits, certainly fit that bill.
I think a program we talk a lot about in our show is Ohio State. Why?
Sure.
2 reasons. 1, Notre Dame's going to play them first game of the year. You're naturally going to talk a lot about them in that case. 2, as you and I have talked about multiple times, if Notre Dame for Notre Dame to catch Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, they first have to catch and surpass Ohio State because that's the Midwestern powerhouse. But go look at what Ohio State's done with their skill players lately. Who's the best running back they've had in the last few years, right? I mean, Trayvon Henderson may become that guy.
Sure.
But it's J.K. Dobbins.
Sure.
Where's J.K. Dobbins from? He's from Texas. Their receiving core last year, with all due respect to Chris Olave, is a really good football player.
Good player. Yeah.
Archer said the third reason we talk about Ohio State a lot is because he's here. So fair enough,
you, sir. Just for you.
But no, there's other reasons. But yes, we do that.
That could just be down the list, Archer. We love
third,
you, man.
but it's a distant third. How about that, right?
That
But the point is you look at the receiving core they had last year. Jackson Smith and Jigba leads their team in receiving and receiving yards. Who was their best receiver? It was Garrett Wilson. Where were both of them from? State of Texas. Where is Chris Olave from? California. Notre Dame's always try to recruit California. Again, you kind of go through this process of you look Jamison Williams, who they had, and obviously he transferred to Bama, but he was a really good player. Where was he from? St. Louis.
St. Louis.
Where's Notre Dame trying to get more and more skill players from? St. Louis. So the point is, You don't. This is what Ohio State figured out before Notre Dame, and I blame that more on the previous staff just not being good at this. With all due respect, but that the current staff started implementing the moment they were hired. I mean, and that's what your article about. And if you haven't read this, actually, Ryan, like this was really well done. And this isn't something I asked him to do. This is something Ryan just said, oh, by the way, there's a Jaden Greathouse story. And it wasn't really a Jaden Greathouse story. It's more of a Texas story.
Yeah.
But this is why we had Rod Babers on, right? Because we knew this needed to be done. And then Notre Dame has obviously implemented it. And we thought they were going to implement that, but it's really coming to full effect of you are not going to be able to build your roster to compete with Bama and Georgia and Clemson by going down in the Southeast and only recruiting guys that they're also trying to recruit, because you're going to, for now, especially, you're going to miss on those. What
Sure.
Ohio State did a great job of is seeing that, hey, there are other players like that aren't in Florida. Now, they still recruited Florida guys. Benjamin Victor was from Florida. They're still recruiting Southeastern guys, East Coast guys. Travion Henderson's from Virginia, right? There's still Georgia. They got plenty of Georgia guys. But they realized, like what you and I have talked a lot about, and I've talked about even in the past, is that if you look to the Southwest, there are dudes like that are just as good as the guys in the Southeast. But a lot of schools are followers. And for a long time, Notre Dame was followers. And Ohio State was saying, hey, look, A&M's down. Texas is down. Oklahoma's good, but they're not the power we are. Let's go down there and get – so they got Ezekiel Elliott out of Missouri. It goes back even further than the guys we talked about. They got Ezekiel Elliott out of Missouri. You get J.K. Dobbins out of Texas. You get Garrett Wilson out of Texas. You get Emeka out of Washington. You get Chris Olave out of California, saying, hey, look, we can't fill our roster with just athletes from Ohio anymore. Ohio, which is still by far the best Midwestern state when it comes to producing talent and athletes, still isn't producing enough talent and athletes for them to fill up the rosters the way maybe they used to be able to do. So where are you going to find it? And that's what they're doing. And to me, Notre Dame is late getting there, but boy, have they caught up in a hurry. Sure. And that's the important thing. And yeah, so I mean, that is a benefit to Austin Novosad, but another benefit when you look at Kenny Minchey, what's another state I've said Notre Dame needs to recruit more? It's Tennessee. Yep. And so again, the volume isn't there, but you're going to get some kids like this. And so to me, Tennessee, I mean, you've got Prince Colley from there, Golden Tate, Harrison Smith. I mean, you're not going to fill up with the volume that you get from Texas, but when you get a kid from Tennessee, so again, we're talking about skill. Notre Dame doesn't have a problem recruiting linemen, especially on offense. We're talking about you've got to add more dynamic skill. Texas is a place for that, and they've done a great job so far. And the more you get, the easier it is to go out next year. So maybe Austin Novosad could be the quarterback of your future. Maybe. He's got the tools to be that someday. Because Notre Dame is not recruiting Austin Novosad and Kenny Minchey to just be hole fillers. They're going after these kids because they think these kids can flat out play. I'm telling you that with 100% confidence. But it doesn't mean that you can't also look at some of the other benefits to it, which is maybe this makes the fact that you got James, Micah Bell, Peyton Bowen, if you get Jaden Greathouse on Friday, and we like where Notre Dame is at, if you get him, and if you get Austin Novosad, maybe that opens up the door a little bit next year for a Micah Hudson, for a Nigel Smith. And that's the point. And that's why it's important. So again, it's very important for Notre Dame to be able to say, hey, look, we are going to continue to recruit Southeast. We're going to recruit Georgia. We're going to recruit Florida. We're going to recruit Louisiana. We're going to recruit the Carolinas and Virginia. But we can't rely on those regions alone to find these dynamic players, because there are other regions that has kids, let's be honest, that has kids that are more amenable to leaving the state and the region than maybe what we see in the Southeast. And I think that's a big part of it as well.
And to your point, I mean, it's like, okay, so if you look at like the California kids, for instance, right? USC is going to recruit well because now they have Lincoln Riley, of course, but those California teams have been down, right? Like USC and UCLA have not been great programs over the last couple of years. So you can go into California and you can get a couple players if you're or fits that makes sense. Texas, we've talked about a lot, right? Texas, I think, is going to get better, but they're still not a great program right now. Mm-hmm. They're going to improve because I do like Sark, and I think that getting an Arch Manning and getting that brand going a little bit is going to be great for them. But there's not a power in Texas right now on the football field. You can go down in Texas. Florida right now, Miami's recruiting really well, but Florida football is a mess. Florida State's not very good. Florida is trying to get back on track, obviously, with their new coaching staff, with Napier coming over there from Louisiana, but they're not a great program on the field right now, like Miami isn't either, really. I mean, like, they're okay. They're not a great program, though. So there might be a couple of those in those states where there's a couple of programs that may ascend, a Texas, a USC, a Miami. But right now, there's no power in those states, and those states produce talent. So why not take advantage of that right now?
The difference with Florida, however, and Texas, here's the difference.
Yep.
And you're absolutely right about Florida, and that's why Notre Dame should recruit there, and they are. I mean, they got Keon Keeley out of Florida, right? I mean, they're recruiting that state. But the reason it can't just be the Southeast is because, yes, the Florida schools stink, but you've got Georgia, Alabama, Clemson all right there, LSU all right there. Where in Texas, it's like Texas, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, and it's like, those schools have to go pretty far away to go to Texas as well. LSU, if you're from the eastern part of the state, LSU's, a local-ish type of situation. So my point being is to Ryan's point, I should say, and for whatever reason, and I think part of it maybe is the demographic shift that is a little bit more recent in Texas in regards to some of this, that some of these kids, to me, just for whatever reason, seem more amenable to leaving the region and going to the SEC or going to the Pac-12 or going. I mean, one thing that the offensive coordinator just got fired from Graham Harrell. He recruited a ton of kids from Texas. They were willing to go to USC. Not all of them were good, but they recruited Texas a lot. So those kids seem to be more prone to leaving, and that's a key too. Same thing with that's why I think St. Louis is so important, because there is no in-state power there, and I mean, you'd have to kind of go to Texas and all that. So that's the thing that I love about this staff is they're not sacrificing the Southeast for Texas. It's both, and that's the only way you're going to get your skill to the level it needs to be, top to bottom. Notre Dame has always had a guy here, a guy there that they could go against. And I'll say this: I don't look. I was at the Fiesta Bowl in 2015 in Notre Dame and Ohio State. And with all due respect to all the great players Ohio State had, the two most explosive pound-for-pound athletes on the field that day were both wearing Notre Dame uniforms. And that was Jalen Smith and Will Fuller. I mean, with all due respect, the difference is once you get past Notre Dame's top couple, that's where the drop-off happens. What needs to happen moving forward is they got to fill it out where you're 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and that's what was so good about those 88 to 93 teams is it wasn't just Todd Light. It wasn't just Rocket Ismail. You had Ricky Waters. I mean, you had future NFL backs that could not get on the field in '89. You know what I mean? And that's where they've got to still get to. And this class is a great first step to that if they can close it out. But it's going to be about also building on it. And for that to continue to happen, no matter how good Texas gets, you still have to still give respect to the state because you're still going to be able to beat them for some kids because they're going to be – I don't know what it is, Ryan, but it just looking at the evidence, these kids are more prone to leave the state.
And there's a higher volume, obviously, right? It's a big state. Yeah. There's a lot of football players. Not all of them can go to Texas. Not all of them can go to Oklahoma if they want to travel up north a little bit. Like there's going to be a volume of players that can fit your program and that can make an impact because not all of them can be a Texas Longhorn.
Brandon said part of the reason is it's very hot in Texas.
That's true. That dry heat, man. You got to get out of there.
But if you grow up in it, though, you're used to it. It's like I've known kids from the South that come up here and they're like, man, it's cold all the time. And I'm like, dude, it was like 90. It don't feel like 90. It's like, okay, whatever. But anyways,
I went down to South Carolina this week, man. Talking about dry heat this summer.
Yeah.
The last couple of days was rough.
Yeah,
very rough. Yeah,
I don't miss those days, so I don't miss them at all. We're going to get to a few questions. So that's kind of it for our quarterback conversation. And that kind of tied into some other conversations, but it was all back to why is Novosad and Minchey important, not just as quarterbacks, but also some other reasons. So that's going to do it for our quarterback breakdown for today. Next, we're going to do some questions, but obviously before you leave, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, that notification bell if you're going to bounce now. If you're going to hang around for the questions, we'll get into that. But before you leave, if you are going to leave now, like button, subscribe button, notification bell, sign up. We've had, when I say this, I mean this genuinely, Ryan knows the numbers. We've had hundreds of people have signed up for the message board in the last 5 days. So I don't know where it's coming from, but the word's getting out about what Irish Breakdown's doing. And so we're going to, obviously that's going to keep growing and growing and growing. And we've already had some new members jump in and jump into the conversations, and it's been a lot of fun. So we're going to keep growing that. So sign up for the message board at boards@irishbreakdown.com. Now, Ryan, let's dive into our daily mailbag, and we have some questions. If you have some questions you want us to address, throw them in now. If you threw a question in early, there's a ton of comments. We've had some great dialogue in today's chat. Like I've been so happy to see the chat. Like it's for the 99% of it's been on point. It's about what we're talking about. Great feedback. We're loving it. We're seeing a lot of it. But a lot of the questions at the top, we just weren't able to star all of them. But we do have some. So if you did have some questions, please feel free to throw those in now, and we'll get to those. We did have a question that we did get to, but I did want to show respect to the super chat from Charlie Weiss's last belt loop. I appreciate that very, very much. And we did kind of address it, but I want to address it more directly, Ryan. And I'll kick this to you because you and I have talked about what we've learned from our sources about what Notre Dame's looking for. He asked, are they going to talk about Notre Dame, or is Notre Dame going to offer dudes that can actually compete and win the starting position, or is it another body to have in a quarterback room until CJ comes?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it a bunch, obviously. Notre Dame is not going to take a guy just to take a guy. Like, they have identified Austin Novosad and Kenny Minchey to start out with as they expand the board here, we believe. Those are guys that they think can come in and they can play football, right? Like, they can compete to play for Notre Dame. So, I no, it's not a situation where, like, hey, we want to have a quarterback every year, but, like, this is a placeholder from Tyler Buckner to when CJ comes on campus in 2024. Notre Dame wants a guy that can come in and can compete to play for Notre Dame. So no, it's not a placeholder. They want a guy that can play football.
Yeah. That's not just what we look at. And that's not just our evaluation of these two players. That's what our sources tell us. They're not just now, if it gets to the point where they kind of have to take a flyer on a guy to fill a depth chart in November because they've missed on everybody, sure, they may have to do that. But I think at that route, from the sources I've talked to, they would just say, screw it, we're just going to look at the grad transfer route. Like, we'll just look for a transfer that that's a decent player that's looking to provide depth, that maybe wants to get a degree from Notre Dame, something like that. I think is what they would do, that instead of just taking a kid. Because here's the thing, if you just take a kid for a body, you've now committed at least 4 years of a scholarship to a kid you don't think can play for you.
Right.
And that's just not first of all, that's bad strategy. Two, we've never been told that. And we've been told directly the opposite from our sources, that they believe these kids can play. And yes, I'm pretty confident in saying that Ty Maurice absolutely loves CJ Moore. And I've said this on this board many times, going all the way back to when Dante Moore first committed to Notre Dame silently. CJ Carr would always come up in the conversations that I'd had with people around Notre Dame. So I'm confident saying that they love CJ Carr. But they also understand, I think, that you can't just put all your eggs in a kid over a period of time, right? It's one thing to say we're going to only recruit this kid in this class. But when they did that, what was Tom Reese also doing? He was also recruiting CJ Carr and Julian Sayin in the 24 class. And then, of course, CJ was the guy he wanted most, but they needed to make sure they could get CJ. And once that became apparent, then it was CJ. So they weren't just recruiting one guy in a class and saying, well, we're just going to rely on Dante and not focus on CJ, or vice versa. So they understand that CJ's got 2 years left of high school. What if he gets injured? What if he doesn't pan out? I mean, there's all types. They understand that. And so when they recruit these kids, they are genuinely looking for kids that they believe, which is also partly why I think they focused more on the first two kids than Brock Glenn. Because I think there is bigger questions about Brock Glenn. The ceiling is higher, but if he doesn't get to his potential, then he may not be able to help us when we need him to help us.
Right.
I think the thing about Novosad and Minchey, especially Minchey physically, and both of them mentally, but Minchey's probably in a better physical position to play early. Is let's see what kind of development Novosad has. But what if Tyler Buckner does get hurt and Drew Pine transfers? You need a kid that can help you in your first couple years. What if Buckner blows up and transfers? Blows up and is in the NFL after his third year. And you're going into the 2024 season, with what? True freshman CJ Carr? No, you want to have Steve Angeli battling with someone who's been in the system, and CJ Carr is where you want to be. And that's why it's important that they focus on a kid that they really, truly believe can can play at a high level, in my opinion.
Agree completely.
Let's got some more questions. MT41 says, Brian and Ryan, who would you rather have in this class if you could pick one, Kenny Minchey or Ricky Collins?
If you would have asked me this about 4 or 5 days ago, I would have said Ricky Collins, but I actually am kind of leaning Kenny Minchey here. I think that every time I watch him, I just appreciate more and more about his game. And he's got a sturdy build that we talked about. He's got a live arm. He's a good athlete. Like, there's just a lot to like about Kenny Minchey, man. I like him a ton. Yeah, he's a good football player. Ricky Collins is too, but there's just something about Minchey that's I think is a little different.
I love Ricky Collins. I've said that for a long time. I mean, to me, okay, so this is I'm going to answer it this way, Ryan, and tell me what you think about this answer.
Yep.
If I'm doing a list of top 20 quarterbacks, I'd probably I would rank Ricky Collins ahead of Kenny Minchey.
Okay.
If I'm a quarterback's coach or an offensive coordinator putting my roster together as I know what Notre Dame's roster to be, I would take Kenny Minchey. And the reason I say that is because I do think Kenny has a higher ceiling than Ricky Collins, because Ricky's got a little bit of rawness to him still. He's incredibly talented, and he's a good kid. I got a chance to get to know Ricky a little bit early in his recruitment before Notre Dame settled in on one kid. Really good kid. I said as I said earlier, his commitment to Purdue and the fact that he's told Michigan and LSU thanks but no thanks says a lot about him and his view of loyalty. Now, that doesn't mean he won't ultimately decommit, because decommitting doesn't always mean you're not loyal. Sometimes it's like, look, like Drew Tranquil struggled for months about decommitting from Purdue. And it was I gave my word, but I also know Notre Dame is without question the best thing for me. And it took him a long time to make that decision. And other kids have chosen not to do that. And I commend them for that. But I don't think a kid who flips just, is automatically selfish. And I don't think that's always true. In each case is different. And with all due respect, there's a difference between Purdue and Notre Dame in a lot of different ways. So maybe Notre Dame could get him, but I have a great deal of respect for him. But the reality is this Ricky Collins is still got a lot of rawness to him. And Kenny Minchey is a guy that I think, again, you've got to bring in a guy that could potentially, within his first 2 years in the system, could potentially step on the field and play for you. I think Ricky would maybe need a little bit more time in Notre Dame's offense against the competition that Notre Dame plays is just going to need a little bit more time. So even though if I'm just doing a prospect ranking, I would rank Ricky higher. From what Notre Dame's needs are, I think I'd pick Minchey. Now, I would have not said that a year ago, because a year ago, the gap in them as players was significant. But after watching Kenny as a junior, he has closed that gap tremendously. And I'll say this about both of these kids. In most years, Kenny Minchey and Austin Novosad are top 10 quarterbacks in the class. In most years, easily top 10 guys. Agreed. Last year, they're both top 10 guys for sure. In this year's class, it's a lot harder because it's an incredible class. But fit-wise, I would take Minchey and Novosad over Ricky Collins because of the things that I mentioned before. And at the end of the day, the cheesy answer is I'm always taking the kid that wants to be at Notre Dame, right? I mean, that's obviously the goal. And then 99 props became one, same thing. This is a different look at the thing. So earlier we talked, Charlie Weiss's last belt loops question was how does Notre Dame view them? So Ryan, with this question, I want this to be more of our opinion. So I'm going to kick it to you and let you answer this one, because I think we're on the same page. The question 99 problems, but BK ain't one, asks, can you win a title? Not whether Notre Dame thinks they can, but can you win a title with either or both of Austin Novosad and Kenny Minchey? So I'll let you kick off with this, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, the reason that we talk about quarterbacks being so important is that you can have a wider margin for error the better the quarterback is, right? Like maybe you have a deficiency in one spot or another, or there's something about your team that is a deficiency just as a whole group, like whatever it might be. I think that with how Notre Dame is recruiting, and if they can develop, yes, the answer is yes. I think that they can win with both Austin Novosad and Kenny Minchey. I think they're both talented enough. We just saw a Georgia team, and I know we talk a lot about, like, it's a little bit of a weird year, but Georgia had a lot of players drafted, obviously, right? They were a really good football team. They just won a championship with Stetson Bennett, and that is because there was a lot of good around him, right? So those guys, you need things to be a little better around it than maybe if it was a Dante Moore in the class or somebody to that degree, right? In my opinion. So the margin for error is a little bit smaller, but I think that with how Notre Dame is recruiting, if they can develop properly and they are the coaches that I think that they are, then yes, I believe that they can win with both those guys.
I agree. I think to Ryan's point, are they going to put a team on their shoulders the way that Trevor Lawrence did? No. Do you know who else isn't going to do that? Just about everyone not named CJ Stroud and Bryce Young, maybe. Because even then, neither of them were the kind of athlete that Trevor Lawrence was. I mean, like I said, Trevor Lawrence went out and ran for over 100 yards against Ohio State in 19 in the playoff. And if he didn't, they wouldn't have won that game because they were just beating Clemson's receivers up at the line of scrimmage. And so Ohio State had to get out of that a little bit because they were just running off the corners and Trevor was just taking off running. And so they had to do some different things. And nobody in the country, in my opinion, is that. So nobody has that. Can they be, because what is Austin Novosad's ceiling as a player? If he pans out and reaches his full potential, what kind of player can he be? And I sit there and say, Mac Jones.
Sure.
Yeah, Mac Jones. Like if he maxes out his potential, he's a Mac Jones type of player where, Mac Jones is nothing like Trevor Lawrence. He's not in the same universe as Trevor Lawrence as a talent. But what was Mac Jones? I got players around me, and I'm a master at running this offense. And I can make some throws. I mean, Mac Jones can make NFL throws too, right? He's not
for sure.
He's not just some Division III kid who's wicked smart and can get the ball out to great players, right? So I think that's the kind of player, the style of play that Austin Novosad brings to the table. When I look at a Kenny Minchey, I think the CJ Stroud comparisons are really comparable. He doesn't have the length and the size that CJ Stroud has, but the type of player, I see a lot of that. So does he have the same top 5 overall physical tools? I don't know, but I think he's a really good football player. And, as I could think through some different guys, there's probably some better comparisons for the specific talent level, but Novosad very much compares to Mac Jones. I think with Kenny Minchey, I'd have to kind of think through some other type of players to just see more of the level. But this is a kid that flat out could come to Notre Dame, be a multi-year starter. And if there's some talent around him, you can beat anybody with him. And I'd say the same of Novosad. What they're not is guys that are going to do it right. Yeah. They're not Trevor Lawrence that's just going to put a team on his shoulders and will you to victory. Deshaun Watson was very similar to that to Clemson, and in 2016. They're also it's important though because they also can't be Jacob Coker and Greg McElroy because Notre Dame's raw. They can't be Stetson Bennett. They've got to be better than that, right? Where they're not going to win the championship because of everything else, and you just don't screw it up. I do think these are kids that are good enough to say, if you give me some weapons, I can go make some magic, right? So yes, I do think they can be that kind of player. Are they on the same level as Dante Moore? No, I don't think they are. I mean, I've said this before. Dante Moore is my number 1 ranked quarterback in this class. But is the gap enormous? No, it's not. I don't think that it is. And in some cases, the ceilings, I would say, for all 3 players, Ryan, isn't that different. The ceiling. Right. Yeah. My thing about Dante is Dante has, in my opinion, without question, the highest floor of any quarterback in this class. It just my opinion.
Yep.
Brandon Plesner says, I think we talked about that earlier, Brandon, the Chris Parson. Yep. He would be a little lower on my list just because of what Notre Dame is looking for. But if Notre Dame started to make a run at Chris Parson, I'd be happy because that kid's I really like his film. My only hesitation about Chris Parson is he the type of player you're looking for? I'm not sure. But if Notre Dame said, hey, you know what? We really think Tyler Buckner is going to be a dynamic run throw guy, and we kind of like having that element in our offense. Yeah, go get Chris Parson. He's not the athlete that Tyler Buckner is, but he can make a lot of plays with his legs. Not a lot of quarterbacks are the athlete that Tyler Buckner is. And if you're looking for that, you need to go recruit Avery Johnson. That's the only guy that's a better athlete than what Tyler Buckner was coming out of high school, in my opinion. Number 1 ND fan, do you expect quarterback recruiting to go into the fall?
It's a little tough to predict that, right? Because I mean, you're pretty much restarting a board now. And we talked a little bit about Austin Novosad in theory wanting to have a decision whether to flip or not to flip sometime this month. John talked about that a little bit, but I mean, it's conceivable to think that they may want to take the process a little slower, whether it's Kenny Minchey or Austin Novosad or somebody else that's added to the board. So I don't have a great answer because I don't know. I think that Notre Dame would like for it to get figured out by the end of summer, but just impossible to predict since it's kind of like a reboot at this point, which is a little different.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically what you're saying, Ryan, is if the two kids that we think are on the board now if they get one of those two, I think the decision, it'll be done before the season starts.
Yes.
If they don't get one of these two and they choose to go somewhere else or stick with their current commitments, then yes, it will go into the fall. Because then you're going to have to flip someone, and that's going to take a much longer process than a kid who's more of a natural fit for you like Minchey, and a kid who's can flip, but he's kind of open to being flipped, like Austin Novosad.
Flippable.
Right.
Yep.
Other guys, you're going to have to convince them to flip. We're like, I mean, so then you say, hey, okay, let's just recruit Ricky Collins, and let's do with Ricky what we did with Dante and just put all our eggs in that basket. That's a really risky proposition, and I don't know if they can afford to do that a second time in this class. I'm okay with it the first time. I know people can disagree on that, but I think there's fair arguments to make on both sides. That's why I don't spend a lot of time arguing with people anymore about the strategy, because I think it's a legitimate strategy. So what I would have done, I also understand why people are concerned about it and didn't like it. Totally fair, either side. It's one of those ones where I don't think there's a right or wrong, in my opinion. I know the people that think that it was the wrong move to do they do think there's a wrong. I just don't. It just didn't work, and so that's kind of where I'm at in this particular one. But yes, I think it could drag on for sure.
And I know there's some people that didn't like the all-in kind of conversation when it first happened. So those people, I mean, again, like you guys, I guess we're ahead of it in that sense. But a lot of it now is hindsight. I mean, it really is, because like we talked about, I mean, Dante Moore was silently committed to Notre Dame. So if he was adamant enough to go public and then to stick to that commitment, and if there was different things going on behind the scenes, then it's a completely different conversation right now. And then everybody would be praising the all-in conversation, right? I understand it's when things don't go your way, it makes you damper, but I agree. I think that there is definitely times where the all-in strategy is appropriate, and I think it was appropriate. It just unfortunately did not finish the way that we would have hoped.
Right. Sean Ziegler says, are you guys losing confidence in landing Jaden Ausberry? Sean, I'd be curious. No, both of our easy answers, no. I just would be curious to hear from you as to why you kind of asked the question that way. I'm just curious. Like, is there something that you're seeing or hearing? I'm very curious about that. But for us, no. Because what I found will happen sometimes is somebody will read something somewhere else and they come ask us this general broad question about, hey, instead of saying, hey, look, I just read such and such said that they don't think kid's going to go here. What do you think? And then letting us speak to that specific report. And it may not be that. He's just asking, maybe just asking because he hasn't committed anywhere yet. But I would also encourage you to listen to the show that Sean Davis and I did yesterday. We spent a lot of time talking about Jaden Ausberry and where we think things stand. So I would be curious, Sean, to hear kind of why you asked the question that way. I think I would like to hear that if you don't mind sharing.
I think some things sometimes get taken in ways that aren't intended as well. Because like I saw somebody on the message board yesterday that was like, are you losing confidence in Ronan Hannafin or something? And I'm just like, I texted Brian. I'm like, is something happening here?
Like he asked me, like, did you say, like, and then he's like, did you say something on the show? I was like, no, I didn't.
Right. I'm like, I guess there's just some misunderstanding in that example, but yeah. Would love to hear about that though, Sean.
Absolutely. Adam Blair says, who are some of the top defensive linemen? And now that I know this is how to get Ryan fired up. Who are some of the top two defensive linemen in 2024 Notre Dame is getting high interest from? So, Ryan, the first three that I would like for you to talk about, and then name some others, I would like for you to kind of talk about Justin Scott, Elijah Rushing, and Nigel Smith.
I can do that. Yeah. There it is. Well, Justin Scott is obviously a massive, massive defensive tackle out of the St. Louis area. He's listed at 6'5", 310. He doesn't quite look 310 on film to me. He looks a little bit lighter, but I mean, the kid is just length and explosiveness, and he moves really well for a guy that you would consider to be probably a nose guard in Notre Dame's system. So I like him a ton. Nigel Smith is one of my favorite players in this class. I mean, he's kind of that strong side defensive end who will probably fit in as a 3-tech eventually. He's out of the state of Texas. He's like 6'4", 6'5", 260 plus pounds. He's sort of similar to like a Jason Moore in the 2023 class that just committed to Ohio State. They're kind of that strong side defensive end, super physical type of players. And then Elijah Rushing is out of the state of Arizona. He's 6'5", 225, 230 pounds, somewhere in that ballpark. Somewhat similar. He has a little bit of Keon Keeley to him, right? Like he's a little bit of a looser athlete. He's a Viper prospect. Notre Dame is recruiting, but he could also maybe grow into a strong side defensive end. Not quite as twitchy as a Keon Keeley, but certainly twitchy and long and has a lot of those traits. So those are a few of the guys that are still on the board on top of what they have already in Brandis Davis-Swain, obviously, and Owen Wafel. Brian,
Ryan, let me interrupt you real quick because I do want to get your thoughts on. I want to follow up on what you're. Before you move on, I want to follow up on something.
Yep.
Do you think, because we've broken down sort of the why there's the strong side end now compared to back in the day when you could kind of have two of a similar type of guy. A lot of it being the fact that if more teams have to get guys out of the box at the second level, which means you have to protect the edge a little bit more, protect the inside gaps. Your extra run defenders now coming from the third level a lot of times in the 4-2-5, 3-3-5 type of defenses to defend the teams that spread the width of the field. We've explained that. With that in mind, do you think you could see a defense in the future that if Elijah Rushing maxes out his physique, that you could see a situation where you have an Elijah Rushing type and a Keon Keeley type on the field together? I'm curious to get, because you kind of mentioned in the passing, I'm really curious about that because I think he's got a much thicker frame than maybe Keon did. But I'm kind of curious your thoughts on that. If you could see those two guys eventually to where you can still get the physicality you need at the big end, but also, I mean, the one thing we know would be they may not be able to stop the run, but the one thing that dude would be able to do is rush the flipping quarterback. So when I'm asking the question, I'm not asking it is when they're playing USC, can they do it? But more of in a traditional sense against a team that does have some balance, do you think those two could be starting bookends together down the road?
No, that's a great question. I just would want to correct myself real quick. I accidentally said St. Louis with Justin Scott. I meant Chicago. Obviously, he's right in Notre Dame's backyard. Yes, the answer is yes.
St. Ignatius is what you meant to say, because that's the high school he goes to.
Has to be. We've been talking a lot about St. Louis today. I know you're trying to save me. I get it.
He's still coming back from vacation, people. Give him a break.
I mean, honestly, you know why? It's because the next guy I was going to talk about is Jayshon Ross, who's out of the state of Missouri. So yeah. Anyway, reshuffling here for a second. Yes, to answer your question, Brian, I think that the difference, ultimately the difference between the strong side end and the weak side defensive end or the Viper is going to become far less of like a difference in future years, right? Like I think that you want players that can kind of do a little bit of everything. And I mean, when you have a guy like a Keon Keeley and Elijah Rushing, for instance, I mean, both those guys are, in my opinion, going to be 6'5", 6'6", 260 pounds down the road. I think they both can do those duties of playing strong side defensive end, but also play Viper, work in space a little bit, but also be that rusher, right? Like be that true outside track guy. So yes, I think that you do not have to separate them as much as maybe you once had to. Like, I don't think that you have to say, here's Isaiah Foskey, here's Myron Tagovailoa-Amosa. Like, I don't think that those
or Khalid Kareem, right.
I think that eventually those two are going to merge together a little bit more, and they're going to be a little bit similar skill sets. And I also think that's going to happen, honestly, with the interior defensive line with 3-tech and nose. Like, I think eventually that's just going to be long, physical, gap shooting defensive linemen. And I don't think that, I think that the ability to just rotate them, like, oh, strong side flipped, like they traded. Now the 1-tech or the nose has to move over to 3-tech, and you're fine. Like, I think the interchangeableness up front, or interchangeability, is big time for Notre Dame moving forward. I think that you're going to see more and more defensive linemen that can do a lot of different things up front.
Right. Now, obviously, Notre Dame is expanding their board. They offered a kid recently, Williams Nameri. I think Nameri is my best guess on how to pronounce his last name. They also offered the TJ Lindsay recently. Yes. They also offered the Smith twins from Connecticut. Those, obviously, Williams had a lot of really good things to say about Notre Dame when you interviewed him. That was your story, right? Didn't you write that?
Yep.
It's so nice having enough of a staff to where I can, like, I'm not sure who wrote that story. I do love that. But I thought it was you. So he's. I mean, you got to get him on campus. That's still very new. I know Notre Dame likes him. That's the way I offered him. They also, I think another intriguing one is the Smith brothers out of Connecticut. Because obviously, more often than not, twins tend to be package deals. Not always. And we've seen Notre Dame benefit from, not being a package deal with the McDonald's back in the day. They got Devin, and Ricardo went to Pitt. But let's just assume that they are kind of a package deal. What are your thoughts on those two type of players as far as their fit at Notre Dame and just their upsides as players?
Yeah, so Jared and Jacob Smith. Jacob is the longer defensive end, more the Viper type. Jared is more of the Jason Adamalola type of interior defensive line, although he does play on the edge a little bit. Out of the state of Connecticut, I told Brian this stat before. I'm just going to reiterate it again, and I just want to say it slowly because it's still insane. Last season, as sophomores, those two twins combined for 58 tackles for loss and 19 sacks in one season. They had 58 tackles for loss in 10 games. They almost averaged 6 tackles for loss as a duo last year on the high school level, which is just absurd. So Jacob is the long defensive end. Like I said, he's 6'5", 220, 225 pounds. They play a 3-man front where he's playing a lot of 4-4-I, but he is a true Viper, man. He is bendy. He's got some change of direction to him. He's a twitchy outside pass rusher. I like Jacob a ton. Jared is more of, like I kind of said, he's not the biggest defensive lineman in the world, but he's got some Jason Adamalola vibes for me, right? Like he's 6'3", about 260 pounds. He's probably going to be 280, 285 pounds when by the time he gets to campus, wherever he ends up choosing. And he's got a little twitch. He's got a little first step quickness. He's a gap shooting 3 tech. Like that's what he is. So they are very talented. Especially Jacob. I think Jacob is a really impressive player, but they're both ranked in the top 125, I believe, by 247. So like they're well-regarded players. And if they are a package deal, Notre Dame is going to be lucky because they are very disruptive defensive linemen out of the state of Connecticut.
So Sean Ziegler responded to why he was asking about the Jaden Osborne. Yeah. I love his response. I love the honesty of it. Just BKPTSD. Just seemed like it's dragging out a little. Just so for context, his recruitment actually is not dragging out. He had always said in the past he was going to make a decision in the fall. He was going to take official visits or take visits in the fall, not officials, because only has, I think, one official left. But he had always stated he was going to be a fall decision. So if Notre Dame lands him this summer, it'll be a lot like what happened last year with Tobias Merriweather, where Tobias had said he was going to be a December decision, but he just knew Notre Dame was where he wanted to be, and so he sped it up. So it's actually not dragging out, actually, at least not yet. Now, as I've said, if this goes into the fall and he's uncommitted, then that could be like, okay, clearly he's not sold on Notre Dame. But I don't think him being uncommitted as of July 12th is giving me any cause for concern at this point.
It's not a red flag. Yeah, right. Well said.
So some more stuff, some really good questions. Adam Blair's D-line question was a really good one. John A1 says, does the pro-style quarterback prototype still exist, or has it been drastically changed? I would say yes and yes.
So the elements of playing in a pro-style system, like the ability to go through reads and then be, quick on your progressions and to, understand spacing and doing all that type of stuff. Like, yeah, of course it exists, John. I think you're seeing different types of quarterbacks now being able to fit into that system because, honestly, like there's private quarterback coaching. I think there's just better coaching year round on a perspective as well. Like guys are just being able to kind of assimilate the system a little quicker, and it's kind of becoming more prevalent as far as the development is concerned. So I think that it's to Brian's kind of points, yes and yes. Like it has merit on both sides, in my opinion.
What we're not seeing as much of is the old school drop-back quarterback. What did that mean? That meant big. It meant sometimes a mobile, right?
Lumbering.
And you'd kind of like there aren't a ton of I'm just thinking of like back in the 80s and 90s, there just aren't a lot of those
Jim Plunkett's. There aren't a lot of Jim Plunkett's.
There aren't a lot of Neil Lomaxes anymore. There aren't a lot of those kind of guys, right? Where they're just kind of big, not overly mobile pocket passers. I think the quarterback has become a much more athletic position. There's, like for example, John Elway was a pro-style quarterback, but he's a pro-style quarterback who was really athletic. Joe Montana was a pro-style quarterback, but he was an athletic guy. I think what's happened is now teams have looked for more of that type of pro-style quarterback, and so there's two guys that I think from back in my day that would thrive in the modern offense more than any others, and obviously Montana's one, but I'm talking about different, not Notre Dame guys. I think John Elway and Dan Marino both would be phenomenal in today's modern offenses. And I say that because I'm bringing them to it because they're such different players. They're both pro style. Dan Marino would be an RPO machine. Now, not the read the RPO, but the NFL RPO, which is where you're pulling and throwing, right?
With that release quickness.
Yes. So he is a statue in the pocket, but his ability to get the ball out quickly and be a decision maker would help. But I do think that he would have some issues with the speed of the game at times, which is honestly something he had issues in the NFL when he was playing. If you could have a really athletic, disruptive defense, Marino would get in trouble. And that's why he never had the overall team success that John Elway had. And so with John Elway, I think he's more of the Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen type, which of the modern pro style quarterback. I mean, I won't say he was the first, but he was one of the first that brought that kind of arm strength. I mean, look, John Elway did not invent the mobile quarterback. I mean, go watch Fran Tarkenton, go watch Roger Staubach. You know what I mean? Like, there were mobile quarterbacks, but they weren't often in the big size and the big arm that John Elway brought to the table. The offense has also changed too, because I mean, I'm watching games of John Elway. Go back and watch the 86 AFC Championship, and he's taking like 9-step drops from under center. Your first 3 steps, you're turning around. It's like almost like you're running, and the game has changed too. And so I think that, to Ryan's point, that's where a lot of this, like, there's a more diverse skill set where, like, back then it's like kind of all the quarterbacks were kind of the same. They're like 6'3" plus, dropbacks. And then like the guys like Elway and Randall Cunningham and Steve Young were like these weird anomalies because everybody's just looking for that guy that could do a 7-step drop and the big arm and all that. I think the immobile drop back quarterback is kind of a thing of the past, but then the counter to that is going to be like, but the greatest quarterback of this generation is exactly that guy in Tom Brady, and he's still rolling.
He's at the tail end of the generation, though. But to your point, yeah,
I mean, he won a Super Bowl 2 years ago at the age of 57. I mean, you know what I mean? Like,
I'm talking about the guys that are coming in the game now.
No. But here's the point, though. What I'm saying, however, is that style can clearly still work.
Sure.
However, I don't think it's as easy as that style to work now as it did before, and that's why it's only being done by a guy like Tom Brady.
I don't disagree with that.
Is my point.
Yeah.
And so, whereas back in the day, a lot of guys were like Tom Brady in this regard, the lack of athletic. Now, they weren't as good as Tom Brady, but they were the tall, immobile, vertically oriented, quarterback, which is what what kind of Tom Brady was early in his career, because he evolved into a much different quarterback. But it was play action, throw the ball downfield. Like Drew Bledsoe, to me, would struggle in today's game because he's so unathletic that the pass rush would consume him. I think the modern pro style quarterback is more of, and you could use, Josh Allen to me is a bit of a unicorn. Lamar Jackson, a bit of a unicorn. It's more, to me, the two prototypes of the modern pro style quarterback is more Pat Mahomes and Joe Burrow. That, where they're not runners, but they're athletic. And you have to be that in today's game. For whatever reason, I don't think offensive line play is as good as it used to be. I also think part of that is because front sevens are so much more athletic than they used to be.
That's fair.
And I think it's a combination of those two things. And I think the offensive line thing is because you're seeing so many spread air raid offenses in college that is a tough offense for linemen to transition to a pro-style NFL system. And we've seen a ton of these air raid guys, and not even just air raid, but like the Gus Malzahn spread. A lot of these really good offensive linemen that play in those systems that really struggle when they get to the next level. And that's happened. I mean, Ryan, you and I could talk about a lot of athletic freaks that never pay. Greg Robinson, right? A lot of these athletic freaks that don't do anything in the NFL because the technical part and the mental part's not the same because of how simplified the air raid is. Whereas back in the day when kids are running veer and stuff like that, it was a completely different offense in the pro style, but it was still complex and technique was so important. I think the lack of technique that's taught at the college level by a lot of schools has not hurt skill players because it's easier to teach that. I think it's killing line play. And that's why I don't think offensive line play is as good as it used to be, because now it's so scheme driven, where back in the day it was technique driven and toughness and strength and length. Now it's like you can have a team like Clemson with a very mediocre offensive line win 2 championships, right? 20 years ago, that was unheard of. You had to have a great offensive line.
Was that shade thrown at Mitch Hyatt again? You need to let him live, man.
No, not
I'm
at
just
all.
kidding.
Not at all. I loved Mitch Hyatt. He was a really good undrafted player. Sorry. Archer452 asks, do you think CJ Carr is committed to the program or the coach? If Tommy Rees moves on before 2024, do you think CJ sticks with Notre Dame? I think it's both, Ryan.
Yeah. I mean,
I think he loves Tommy Rees because that's the coordinator, but I think he loves Notre Dame. And he's also talked to us a lot about in our interview of him is Tommy Rees isn't the only person that recruited CJ Carr to Notre Dame. Marcus Freeman was involved in that process as well. He came on later, as you'd expect, but I think he's committed to the school. That's my read of the situation. That doesn't mean he doesn't love Tommy Rees, but I don't think it's like if Tommy Rees left for somewhere else, CJ would just automatically follow him over there.
Well, and I also think that CJ is a thoughtful kid, right? So, like, I think he's aware that, like, Tommy Rees is a 29-year-old coach that has other aspirations. Like, does he think that he's just going to be the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame forever? Like, I think that I think he reasonably understands that, yes, Tommy Rees's relationship with me is a big reason why I'm here. There's no doubt about it. But I think that it's a full scope. I would be very surprised if CJ Carr's decision-making was as shallow as one single coach.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very surprised in that instance.
Right. Zachary asks, is there a possibility that they could wait and take 2 in the 2024 class? Ryan, I think this speaks to the depth issue. Could they do that? Sure. Is that ideal? I think that would have to come, Ryan, with also taking a grad transfer to fill that need in 2023, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. I look, guys, I think that I talked about this earlier. There's only been one time in the last 20 years that Notre Dame has not taken a quarterback in the class. I think there's going to be a kid in 2023. Now, if that's a reclassification for CJ Carr down the road, we'll see what happens. But either way, I think there's going to be a quarterback in 2023. And to Brian's point, you need a player in 2023 that can come in and that can play football, like a guy that can compete if something happens, right? So getting 2 in 2024, if they're great players, awesome, but also they're going to be on the same equal footing going into going onto the field and into the program. Are they going to be able to help early on? Are they guys that need to be kind of taken along slowly? There's a lot of question marks in that instance. So I think that you're going to get a quarterback in 2023. I think you're going to get a kid in 2024. Ultimately, I do not see them passing on a quarterback in 2023. Right. I just don't see it.
I think the only way that happens is if they just flat out miss and just don't get anybody. And that's what we went to earlier is that would be where I think they would take they would pass on 23 if they can't get one of the kids they like. I think they'd pass. If they miss on Novosad and Minchey and Collins and a lot of those guys, I think they wouldn't. They're not going to just take a guy. I think that's when they would say we're going to get a grad transfer or a transfer to come in and provide depth in 23, and then take a second guy in 24. But then again, if you're taking a second guy in 24, you're not going to get Julian Sain or Jaden Davis or Dylan Raiola to come in with CJ Carr. The only reason Bama's doing it is because most everybody in college football recruiting knows that the odds of Dylan Lonergan ending up playing college football are not high. In my opinion, I think this is a play by Bama to help the kid out as much as anything, because now he has some leverage as he goes into the Major League Baseball draft next year. Hey, you know what? You don't want to draft me higher. You want to pay me this. I'm just going to go play college football at Alabama. I mean, I think that's a smart thing for him to do. So I right now, from what I'm hearing, the odds of both of them ending up in college is slim. You just don't see that often where 2 highly ranked kids commit. Like, for example, you could get lucky and the number 399 player in the country turns out to be Mac Jones, which is what happened at Alabama. But Alabama didn't recruit Mac Jones thinking he was going to go be the number 15 overall draft pick. And you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So you just don't see it that often. So my point is, if you're going to take a depth player in 24, you might as well just take one in 23, right? Agreed. So I don't think they would take 2. But that doesn't mean if like they had to take a grad transfer and all of a sudden Julian Sain was like, hey, I still want to come to Notre Dame and I want to compete with CJ. Would they still take 2? As long as CJ was like, yeah, cool, I'm cool with that, right? Because that's the thing too, is like you found your guy, and that's the reality of it, in my opinion. And I think that's what they're going to do. So very good question, Zachary. Very good question. And I think that's it, Ryan. I'm going to look down here and see if we had any more questions that have popped up here. Down here from fans, and I think we're good. I think we got to most of them. So good questions today, everybody, and really, really good quarterback discussion in the chat today. I really enjoyed watching that very much. So See, some people are just trying to start some stuff. Okay. You see, some people are trying to start some stuff.
Jay Bateman.
Yep.
Wow.
Love it. So, hey, everybody.
Is he coaching somewhere? Is Jay Bateman
It's
coaching
got to be somewhere. I mean, somebody. I mean, if Brian Van Gorder can get hired, I'm sure Jay Bateman can get hired.
Well, isn't Van Gorder in high school now? He's coaching high school.
But he got hired twice. He's at Florida as the linebackers coach. That's cool. I mean, I can dig that. I think he's a decent position coach. I just don't think he's a very good coordinator. He's not an idiot. He didn't get to where he's gotten to because he's just a complete idiot. I mean, he did some nice things at Army. He did some nice things at Ball State. That's when I first met him. It was when I first met him, like that's the first time I'd actually hung around him. I first met him because I coached against him when he was at Siena as the head coach. We played them when I was at Duquesne, but a friend of mine coached at Ball State, had a chance to meet him down there. Nice guy, good position coach. I just don't think he's a big time college defensive coordinator. I think he's an Army college defensive coordinator, but hiring him as a linebackers coach at Florida, that's a good hire in my opinion. I think, and I've heard he's a decent recruiter. I don't know that firsthand, but I've heard he's a decent recruiter. So good for him. Good for him. It was never personal. I just think he's really bad as a defensive coordinator. His defenses in North Carolina were garbage and very poorly coached. But as we've said, hey, not every coordinator is meant to be a head coach. Not every great position coach is meant to be a coordinator. Not every good coordinator at the lower level is going to be a good coordinator at a higher level. Your success doesn't always translate. And sometimes it does. If it did for Jim Tressel, but it doesn't always, in my opinion. So that's the reality there. So that's going to do it for today, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining the show. Hey, don't forget, right? Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share the podcast. Those things help us, right? So when you share the podcast, when you hit the like, when you hit do those type of things, it helps us in the algorithm. It helps us continue to be seen by more and more people. If you're listening via podcast, give us a 5-star review. That also helps with the same thing. And if you don't want to give us a 5-star review, I'll actually kindly ask you not to give a review at all, but you're more than welcome to, but I'll ask you not to. But we would really appreciate a 5-star review. And of course, as I said, man, our message board has exploded the last week. We're really excited about that. Tons of new signups. We think we found the fix for our board speed. It's been much, much, much faster the last few days. So that's been good. Tons of great conversation. And I'm just dying to start doing more and more team stuff. But it's just every time I do, something comes up with recruiting. But we're really going to start getting into our preview here moving forward as well. And so just a ton going on at Irish Breakdown as we get close to our 3-year anniversary, which I'm kind of excited about. So launched Irish Breakdown. The first game I covered, Ryan, as a member of Irish Breakdown, was for the Virginia game in 2019. So the last game at my previous stop, I covered the Georgia game. And by that next week, I had launched Irish Breakdown. Actually, it might have been 2 weeks. I think they had a bye, if I remember correctly. I'm going to have to actually look at that now. I believe they had a bye. So I had like a little bit of a period where I was able to kind of get things rolling. So let me just go back and look at that. No, it was that very next week. So I had something in play and was able to make things happen to where I could get free and go over here and do some things. And so the first game we covered was the Virginia game. So, and that was basically October 1st of September 28th. So it was right before October. And so we're close, man. So we're coming up on our 3 anniversary. We just had our 1-year anniversary of the message board, which was pretty cool. It's gone by really fast, but then it also feels like it's been around for a lot longer than that. But we're just continuing to grow, and it's still fun to see some names in the chat now that we're here from like day one, and we absolutely love it. So anyway, everybody. Mace, you were a little late, man, getting this up. So we've already kind of gone all through this, but I'm a tradition guy. Join the message board, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, leave a 5-star review, visit the IB store for the best merch, and as always, go Irish. Thanks for being with us, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you again tonight. Ryan, you'll be with Sean at the kickoff of the IB Nation Sports Talk at 6. You guys are going to have some recruiting updates tonight, you and Sean, and then him and Vince are going to be together talking about some things. Let me see Sean's notes here real quick. You're going to have some recruiting topics. His son, Jesse, actually will be with him tonight. And this should be Jesse's last show without a microphone. So we have ordered him a microphone, just waiting on it to arrive. So hopefully that'll happen soon because Jesse brings a lot of good content. We just got to get that sound even better. They're going to have some fun. It's a would you rather topics relating to Notre Dame. So that'll be a really fun show. I'm looking forward to that. That'll be a blast. So this is how long our show went today, Ryan. My wife just texted me. I dropped her off at the airport and then came right home and started like 10 minutes after I got home. That's where we're a little bit late. And she just texted me she landed in North Carolina. So the plane's already landed. And she didn't take off till well after the show had started. So great show today. Lots of great questions, lots of great content. And we'll talk to you all again here very soon. 2 hours, right, Ryan? 2 hours. You're going to be back
2
at
hours.
it. So yeah. So anyway, have a great day, everybody. And we'll talk to you again on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.